Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody, and I know I'm a broken record, but it's another beautiful day here in the upper Midwest, although today I can't tell you about Chicago. I'm here in Milwaukee. I've been going with my son. We've been going door to door to tell people to vote early. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not done doing it. So I got a great show for you, and I can say that, knowing it because I already recorded it. This part is live. I'm here with you now on a phone, which you can hear. It's probably not as great. And we have a great show. And Paul is going to take your calls at the usual time at the end of the show. But this door-to-door stuff, I just recommend it for everybody. It's terrific to talk to your fellow Americans. It's terrific to tell them how to vote early. And every vote matters. It makes a big difference. And look, I just want to tell you something about this week. You know, days before the election, right, and days after General Kelly told us that Trump is determined to govern as a dictator, I was stunned that the owners of the Washington Post and the LA Times announced they wouldn't publish endorsements. And, you know, in both cases, the editorial boards of those papers, whose job it is, of course, to write up the endorsements, they had already made their choices, and Kamala Harris was their choice. Really? I mean, this last-minute punt by these two billionaires, the owners of these formerly great news organizations, it's just one more sign of the failure of our major legacy media. But, notwithstanding their efforts, it might actually help Kamala Harris. I mean, really, first, since the press you know this about the press. They cover themselves better than they cover politics. So because of that, more people are going to know that they were going to endorse Kamala Harris than if they'd actually published the pieces. And, of course, second, it's a reminder that today's really rich guys with, their large media platforms, they're no different than what was his name, Citizen Kane, and all these abuses. And let's see, we're third. Just in time to vote, we get another demonstration that these rich guys are so greedy, they would happily sell out our democracy for a defense contract. And I guess, finally, this about face coming so soon after the warnings of General Kelly, doesn't that just tell you guys? It tells me that these people believe Trump is going to govern as a despot, and they want to buy him off. I mean, the Post's Jeff Bezos is no different than X's Elon Musk. Both, they own companies that get billions of dollars of taxpayer money. Billions. And they're so afraid of a corrupt Donald Trump that he might cancel their contracts if they don't support him. And they both know that he's so corrupt that he would reward them for the work they're doing for him now. And they don't mind the corruption, these rich guys. They don't mind it at all. They like it better, than a working democracy because favor is something they can buy. I'm sorry. No. That is not who we are. It's not what I heard talking to people out here this morning. I mean, look, honest government doesn't work that way. Most of us, after all, don't benefit when insiders curry favor from rulers. I mean, look, just ask ordinary Russians, if this is working for them. They're being sent to the front in an imperial greedy war while their oligarchs are enjoying their caviar. Do we really want to be like that? I mean, I don't. And the people I talked to this morning don't. I mean, meanwhile, that other guy, Tucker Carlson, is back. And, of course, you remember Tucker. He got kicked off his perch at Fox. For lying so blatantly that the network had to pay almost $1 billion when they libeled a voting machine company. And now, according to the testimony of Pierre Trudeau, Canada's prime minister, Tucker Carlson, at least according to his sources, and he testified to this, is on Russia's payroll. Carlson and Musk, who's, by the way, the other guy, frequent contact with Putin, they're, of course, regulars at Trump's rallies. Let's put the pieces together, shall we? Because that's what we do on this show. So the rich guys They expect their flattery to make them even richer, because that's what corrupt governments do. And Carlson, he says Trump will be like a father who spanks his daughters. Disgusting, but okay. But he does it because he revels, right, in the idea that women will be punished for their independence. And then, of course, the big independent expenditure money that Trump's campaign is getting is all from fossil fuel lobbyists, because they expect an end to EPA's annoying habit of telling them they shouldn't wreck our planet. Well, and like Musk and Bezos, these oil guys, they know that their cash is good in Trump's store. Heck, Trump told them so directly. Remember, it wasn't that long ago. He went to all those oil company execs and said for $1 billion he would get rid of any efforts to make our energy infrastructure greener. For sale. And for sale if you pay me, and I'll hurt you if you don't. Together, these things spell out dictatorship in big, bold, easy-to-read letters. For God's sake. I mean, I get it. These super rich and the women haters, the polluters, they look down on, Democrats as too honest and too weak to make them pay for their effort to undermine our country. But they think an honest government might make them compete for work, but they think we would never, punish them for their views. And they're right. It doesn't make us weak. So, but for them, it's an easy choice. For them, supporting Trump has no downside, and maybe a new contract or two if he wins. Whereas supporting Harris might, cost them a contract if she loses, but won't hurt them if she wins. So that's their calculus: saving the democracy, making space for common decency, treating the rest of us, treating all Americans like we're equal participants in our society. That's just not something they think about. Well, that's just not us. And here's the thing. This 11th hour reminder that rich courtiers and dictators, think they can rule over the rest of us it's just a slap in the face. It's just another big slap in the face. So if Democrats were afraid, well, this should shake you out of it and tell you just to be determined, right? I mean, the Americans who get up every day and go to work, we know something these extraordinary rich folks don't know, and we do something these extraordinary rich folks will never do. We put America first. That's what we do. That's not what they do. They put themselves first, and they want to buy it all. And look, no matter what these guys say, what Trump says, we aren't suckers and losers when we volunteer to fight for our nation. We're not terrible people when we show up in underfunded schools to try and teach our children. We're certainly not eating their dogs, please. I am so tired of all of their lies, aren't you? Tired of their lies and their condescension and their determination to rule over the rest of us and tell us what we can and can't do and what we can and can't read, what we can and can't think. Please. So today, tens of thousands of other people all over the country, I was out with my son. We were going door to door here in Wisconsin, working, with the behest of the Wisconsin Dems, telling people where they can vote early, and the reception was good. Look, we have an awesome get-out-the-vote operation, we Democrats, all over the swing states. And the other guys, they don't. They're not doing any of this. They wouldn't think of going out and talking to ordinary folks. It's not what they do. Instead, what they actually did, the GOP, the Republican National Committee, they actually just paid somebody else to do it for them. And that is not working out so well. It turns out to be another grift, because those others, it's reported, and it's pretty good reporting because you have trackers on the apps you use when you go door to door. It's reported that they're taking the money, but they're not actually, showing up to do the door knocking. I think there's a little more than irony in that. There is justice in that. And look, before I'm going to run out of time here because I got this great show planned for you, and I'm going to go back to knock on doors. But let me just end with this. Like Simon Rosenberg, our friend, he's been on the show a lot, and, he likes to say this. He's right. We have momentum. We have a better candidate. We have plans America actually likes. And you know what? We treat each other with respect and common decency. We believe the democracy is worth fighting for. Donald Trump may be for sale, but America isn't. And that's the takeaway. Mr. Bezos and those other guys are about to learn the difference. And when we win, and I anticipate we will, let's finish the job by doing the hard work to strengthen our democracy, to strengthen those guardrails they have tried to dent and bend and rip apart these last few years. And when we do, you know what, these wannabe oligarchs and dictators, they won't try and bring us down again. They can go back to just spending their money and doing what they want, but they won't trouble the democracy. And I think that's where we want to be. All right. Thank you for your indulgence in my morning rant. Loved going door to door. Paul is with us. Paul is going to take your calls at the end because I know you guys have a lot to say. And I think you're going to love the show in between because I had, really good conversations. So I will probably be with you next week, although you never know, I may be back out going door to door because it's like the 4-alarm fire time. You take care. We're going to be back with the show after a break.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Aaron Rupar is back, and he is, of course, one of the most important truth tellers, chroniclers of this election cycle. He's watched what's going on. He's shown us what's going on. His work is enormously important, widely shared online, and he's got a really good seat from which to view what's going on in this country. Aaron, thank you for joining me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on.
Hey, look, before we get started, and I'm saying this to everybody I talk to on this show and next week, this will be the last time we talk before this election cycle ends. So I want to start by thanking you for the work that you have done and you've shared with us on this show to help us understand this incredibly important moment in our history. And I know that work entails sacrifices. You've had to spend hours watching things that most mortals would run screaming out of the room if they were forced to watch. And I know that last time we talked, you had an ear infection because of it. So just sacrifice comes in all ways. I hope you're feeling better, but thank you for doing it.
Yeah, I'm feeling better, and thank you. That's very kind of you to say. It's been kind of a crazy month or so. I mean, really going back to the last time when we spoke, which was around DNC time. And there's part of me that's looking forward to getting, to the other side of this, but there's part of me that's kind of still pretty concerned about what that looks like.
Well, let's talk about that. No, let's not talk about that at the beginning. We'll get there. What it's going to look like. Since you've seen it all, I know I want to get to what's happened more recently because it's so important. But just thinking back on the arc of this crazy election, what has stood out to you as sort of the most important things you've seen?
I was just thinking about this actually before we got on a call because I was listening to a podcast that was discussing this, and it kind of reminded me how significant this was. And this was the Tucker Carlson speech from a couple nights ago at the Turning Point event that Trump spoke at in Georgia. And you probably saw the clips from this. This was the speech where Tucker Carlson did kind of a tortured analogy between, daddy coming home and spanking a misbehaving daughter, and how, that's going to hurt the daughter more than the father, but sometimes you have to do that. This is kind of, I think kind of hallmark fascism. And, you listen to the crowd, and the crowd is going crazy for this. And, it's right out there in the open, what this movement is all about. And I think the fact that, if I had to boil down what I find remarkable about this election is that Trump isn't even trying to conceal what he wants to do and aspires to do in his second term. And yet, tens of millions of people are willing to pull the lever for it. So it's a really difficult thing to explain. But I think that's kind of we have to kind of face up to that, that there's a lot of ugliness that we'd rather not, kind of wish away or think we could reason with and, get people to see the light. But, I'm just not sure it's that simple.
I don't think it's simple at all. It's very complicated. I mean, among those tens of millions of people who are going to vote for Trump are going to be ones who, when he starts to behave in all the ways he's told us he would behave, they're going to go, wait a minute, I didn't think this was real. And there are others who are going to cheer him on because that streak has always been part of our country. We don't want to be a diverse nation.
I think you're right about that. I mean, I think when, if we do get to a point, which we will if he wins, where he tries to do these kind of spectacular deportation raids, using the Border Patrol or, uses the National Guard to go after the enemy within, as he puts it. I mean, these are not going to be popular things. And, I think that will, whatever popularity he has when he takes office will go away pretty quickly. But once he has the levers of power at his disposal with people around him who will not serve as a check on him, I'm not sure how easy it'll be to come back from something like that. If the institutions will hold like they did the first time around mostly. So, I don't think that, tens of millions of people, if they knew what Trump really wanted to do, or if they had an idea of what their communities are in for, that, people who they know in their communities who work jobs in their communities might be deported and they might leave their children behind, would they support that? I don't think there'd be some that would, but, so it's a broader coalition. I don't mean to portray the entire Trump coalition as being fascist, but I don't think that fascism has been particularly, they're not really trying to hide it. And for whatever reason, whether it's people kind of, wish casting that it won't be as bad as people say it's going to be, or kind of having nostalgia for 2017 and 2018 and 2019. There's a lot of different factors, but, the fact that Trump can be so overt and he still, is basically a coin flip chance of winning this election, it's hard to wrap your mind around.
I agree. And the business about how, we can't imagine it's going to be so bad. There's never been a moment in history that's awful where right before it, the people who enabled it thought it was going to be as bad as it is. Right? They didn't go. Right? When they elected Hitler, and he was a very popular leader in Germany, the people who put him there didn't really think it was going to be as bad as it got.
No, I mean, the Hitler thing was mainly, kind of a center-right coalition that thought they could bring the left under control with a strong authoritarian leader. And then, he quickly outmaneuvered them and, assumed total power within a year of being elected. I don't think, the Nazi comparisons can be kind of overdone, but I do think they're apt in a lot of ways here. And, I do think that there is legitimate economic discontent in terms of inflation and, a sense that people are further behind than they were 5 years ago. But I think, people maybe don't have the tools to kind of put that in the broader context of other capitalist democracies who have had similar problems, if not, in almost all cases worse than the U.S. with inflation.
Yep.
And that the answer isn't to kind of blow the whole thing up.
I want to spend one more minute on the Nazi thing because, it was just a few months ago that people say, okay, conversation ends when somebody plays the Nazi card. That's just ridiculous. You shouldn't do it. And that's silly. But we just had it played by some of the most senior people in America's military. We had the Nazi card played by generals in the United States Army who know Donald Trump. I mean, that is a should be an enormous way. It's not the crazy leftists, not people who don't know history. These are people who really do know, and they're warning all of us. Why is that not the only thing people are hearing? Why are we like instead? I mean, let me ask this question more articulately. I apologize. There's just such a huge gap between the consequences and what we report on every day. What is that about?
And well, I think, there's also the reality that a lot of people on the far right are extremely siloed in their information ecosystems. And so if you look at, the Daily Wire or the Daily Caller or Breitbart, they probably don't have stories on John Kelly, or if they do, it's smearing the media for reporting on it. And so, I think when we kind of lose any sort of gatekeepers, it becomes really, really difficult to reach those people. And, if a decorated general and lifelong Republican like like John Kelly, who ran DHS during the Muslim ban. I mean, this guy is not kind of a squish by any means. If him calling Trump a fascist can't break through, then, I don't really know what would. I mean, I guess you could argue that John Kelly and Mattis should, get in front of cameras and kind of do this more directly instead of, talking to reporters with just an audio clip that doesn't have the same salience as it would if they did a TV interview or something like that. I mean, you could argue there's more that they should do. But, it is really shocking. I mean, just before we hopped on this call, I was watching a segment from this morning on CNN where they did a fact-check segment, and they did fact-check one Trump claim over him claiming that he never led the lock her up chants in 2016, and they did debunk that. But then their second fact check was Obama claiming during his speech yesterday that Trump put his name on COVID relief checks, and they gave this kind of like a partially false because it turned out that while he said that Biden didn't put his name on the COVID relief checks, he actually sent a letter to people that did have his name on it. So they gave it kind of a partially true, and it's like, in what world is that one of the two big topics that we should be spending our time on when you have Trump yesterday in Las Vegas during his speech last night talking about how migrants with Supreme guns have taken over Times Square? And it's like in these claims that he makes in all of his speeches that are so incendiary and so over the top. And it's like we've just normalized ridiculous things. And then, you spend your time kind of picking apart Obama's speech and, the editorial priorities and kind of judgment there, I do really question.
Right. And it isn't, you began by talking about the silo where some people really do only get right-wing propaganda instead of news. But the mainstream news, the Washington Post said this week, they are not going to run an endorsement. They're going to take a pass. And the coverage in the New York Times isn't dwelling on that one candidate is convicted rapist, convicted fraudster, and a fascist. That's not what the news is. The news is, when will Kamala Harris sit down for an interview? Oh, she answered our questions, but not the way we like. I ask a very good reporter, what happens if, who's to blame if Harris loses? Well, Kamala Harris. Who's to blame if Trump loses? Well, white women. But nobody says Donald Trump. What is it that makes it impossible to hold that man accountable?
Yeah, I really, it's a really complicated topic in that, I was even thinking about this with the Arnold Palmer stuff over the weekend where, this is kind of a sillier one than some of his comments about migrants, but of course his comments about how when Palmer would shower with other golfers, the size of his manhood. And, you probably saw this at the New York Times. They have a live blog where they were covering the Trump speech in real time. And they characterized this as a golf story. And they provided no context. If you had not watched the rally and you only got your news about it from the New York Times, which is the case for a lot of people, you would have had no idea. You would have thought it was just kind of a normal aside that any politician would do during a speech. And, I sometimes wonder if it's almost embarrassing for them to cover this stuff. And I sometimes feel this way in my own Twitter feed when I'm live tweeting a Trump rally, and it's like some of the stuff he says is downright embarrassing, about the migrants taking over Times Square, and nobody really believes this stuff, but his fans do on some level, and it might be more of kind of the fascist id level where they don't take it literally, but they the idea behind it they buy into. But I think the other side of this coin that is worth at least acknowledging is how many swing voters are really reading the New York Times. I do think there is something to that where I think we kind of grasp for reasons and, try to make sense of it and kind of dole out blame rationally. But, I do think some of the appeal of Trumpism kind of, it kind of goes deeper than that. And I do think there are just a lot of people in this country who want to do fascism on migrants, and maybe they won't like it when it happens, but there's an idea that, these people are taking our jobs or, they're poisoning our communities, they need to go. And that's just a very appealing idea, to certain segments of the population. And it's tough to kind of openly acknowledge that, right? I mean, we kind of look for ways to talk around it. It's the media's fault. It's the campaign's fault. But, we could have drawn, we tried to dole out blame after 2016 when Hillary Clinton lost. And on some level, I think it's just that people like Trump and they like, the idea of an authoritarian leader who will punish their enemies.
Aaron, in 2016, when Hillary lost, the reporting, some of it talked about Comey, but a lot of it blamed her for saying some of Trump's supporters are deplorables. And so they blamed Hillary for that. Trump's supporters and Trump himself says that people like you, people like me, people who aren't going to vote for him aren't just deplorable. In some instances, one of his guys says we aren't even human beings. And we certainly are enemies within, and yet no one wants to hold him to account. After he loses, no one is going to say, well, it's Trump's fault because he told half of America they didn't deserve this country.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think part of it is, especially on behalf of people like yourself and myself, there's a temptation to kind of view the MAGA movement as almost like some sort of alien species or something, where I think a lot of reporters, just from my own time in D.C. and kind of being around this, they view the Democrats as kind of being their fellow travelers, their ideological bedfellows. They feel like they have more in common with them. I mean, many of these reporters who we, castigate regularly for doing kind of both sides false equivalencies or kind of running interference for Trump, I don't think they're actually voting for Trump. I mean, I think most of them are probably pretty solid Democratic voters, but for whatever reason, I think, it's kind of a complex psychological topic, because I just don't think there's the same instinct to hold Trump accountable as there is to hold kind of your brethren accountable. And I think we see it over and over in the coverage. And, I think in some instances, like with the Washington Post situation that you talked about earlier, I mean, I think part of that is kind of a fear of retribution that, if they make an endorsement for Harris and then Trump wins, which is, again, is kind of a coin flip proposition at this point, that they might be in the crosshairs more than they would be if they kind of sit it out, and try to pretend to be neutral. And so, I think it's complex. Every situation is a little bit different. I think with the New York Times, and, this was another interesting aspect of the Arnold Palmer situation, was you may or may not have seen that. I actually had someone who looped me in on an email chain where the reporter who was writing that live blog, his name was Michael Gold, somebody emailed him, kind of calling him out saying, hey, what's the deal with this live blog? How did you, why did you characterize this as a golf story? What was the thought process there? And he actually replied to the email, and I saw this posted on Twitter. It was emailed to me, but I saw it kind of out there circulating outside of my email inbox, where he basically said, bring it up with my editor. Like, I had it in the live blog, but that's how they edited it, and that's what they determined that they wanted to publish here. And so then, there's some sort of editorial guidance where, maybe they felt like a direct reference to genitalia is too lewd for them or something like that. But I think Trump is kind of, he on a deep level has kind of hacked the media, because he lies so regularly and so outrageously that, it becomes almost impossible to account for every one of them. And so he just gets away with things that no other politician would, because other politicians, by and large, have enough shame where if they're called out on lying, they're going to adjust their behavior accordingly. With Trump, the lies just get more and more outrageous.
Yeah. Okay. So he lies of them. I mean, the particular one, and we went by it pretty fast, but I'm just not sure that everybody listening knows about it. So just talk about how often he is telling people that cities and towns, not just Times Square, cities and towns all over America have been conquered by an enemy.
Oh, this is every single one of his Trump speeches. And actually, right after we get off this call, he's doing an event in Texas at immigration. I kind of put that in quotes here, if you can see me, because it's not really about immigration. It's about hatred of migrants. But, his regular Trump speeches, he talks about Aurora, Colorado, and he talks about Springfield, Ohio. And with Aurora, the story is that Venezuelan gang members with supreme guns, as he refers to them, have conquered Aurora. And the governor of Colorado is scared to do anything about it, but he will. He suggested he'll deploy the Border Patrol and National Guard to deport these Venezuelan gangs. And then with Springfield, the story is with the Haitian migrants who are there, that there are so many of them in the town that the hospitals are full. The English speaking, he often talks about how the people who speak English in Springfield can't send their kids to school because the schools are full. And that even though some of these migrants, I think pretty much all of them, have protected status, so they're here legally, that he intends to strip their legal status and deport them once he becomes president. And so the conquered town thing refers to Aurora, and kind of the invasion thing, is sort of shorthand for Springfield. But, they both kind of point toward different policies that I think are significant in that, deporting people who are here legally in the case of Springfield, and the deployment of federal forces in a blue state to conduct deportation raids in the case of Aurora.
All right. So the hate is appalling on its own. But what it means in terms of governing is deportation raids, is knocking on people's doors at 4 a.m. And pulling them out of their beds and sending them to some camps that are, I assume, set up on federal lands in states across America. We'll have these concentration camps, and slowly then they'll put people on planes and try and send them to countries that won't take them back. That's sort of one. We also have this incredibly anti-woman rhetoric. Now let's spend a minute, because I also don't think people are fully aware of the appalling thing Tucker Carlson said and how that plays into, new allegations that Donald Trump is once again involved in sexual misconduct, this time back in the Jeffrey Epstein era, and just the treatment of women, and all the way through to what they want to do it isn't so much on abortion. It's that they are in an existential panic. There are not enough white babies being born in America, so they want somehow to force women, I guess, to increase the population of white babies.
Yeah, I don't know if I view it as being kind of that thought through in terms of, you do hear a lot of the white baby stuff, especially from people like Elon Musk. I mean, that's been one of his big bugaboos for a while on X, that the white population isn't increasing rapidly enough or is kind of lagging behind people of color. And I do think there is part of that. I mean, I think it speaks to a worldview that you see also with some of these abortion bans in places like Texas and Georgia, the sense that women kind of don't have the same options that they did in a previous era, and that they, their choices are constrained, and that, they're sort of coerced into carrying these children that they might not want in a lot of instances, and their health obviously is at risk, and in some cases they die. But if you watch a lot of Trump, which obviously I do these days, I mean, he's really not talking about abortion at all, kind of for obvious reasons. It's probably the worst issue that he has in a lot of ways. So he views this migrant hate stuff as a huge winner for him, though, because it really is the number one topic that it's infused throughout the entirety of his speeches. He circles back to it time and time again. It's an animating thing that I think he views as a winning issue, not only among his base, but as kind of a wedge issue where he can peel off votes in, the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and, down in places like Arizona as well. So, polling is kind of showing that, his policies on immigration are more popular than Democratic policies. And that's kind of part of what I was alluding to earlier when I talked about fascism being popular, is that when you poll people on immigration, I mean, there have been some polls that show, a slight majority support for mass deportation for Trump's plan. And again, I think when people kind of see what that's actually going to look like, they probably have second thoughts about that. But with the abortion stuff, I mean, I think obviously it's a centerpiece of Democratic messaging because it is kind of the most popular issue that Democrats have. And I think it speaks to kind of a broader concern about freedoms and rights, for women especially, but for all people. That I think, obviously is something that Democrats talked about a lot in the 2022 midterms as well, right after the Dobbs decision. And, there's still, I think, a really live question as to how salient the Dobbs decision will be. I mean, Democrats have been on a huge winning streak for basically 2.5 years ever since that decision dropped in June of 22. Now we're in a higher turnout environment here in a presidential cycle where, I think the midterms, Democrats may have benefited from the sense that for Democrats, abortion was a hugely galvanizing issue, but for Republicans, not quite as much. But now in a presidential cycle where Trump, has proven that he's good at least at turning out his people, will the fact that Dobbs is such an animating issue for Democrats kind of be subsumed by the reality that, Trump is going to turn out people who didn't vote in 2022. I mean, right now, again, it looks like that could kind of go either way. But, we're 10 days out, and you could tell me that Kamala Harris is going to win 310 electoral votes, and I believe that. You could tell me Trump is going to win 310 electoral votes, and I believe that. Or you could tell me that it's going to come down to the one electoral vote in the Omaha part of Nebraska. So there's really no outcome at this point that would surprise me. And I think it's also, I should just in this context mention that I was looking at a piece of my newsletter this week, looking at some of the polling in recent presidential cycles. And, in 2012, which we kind of think of as being, an Obama blowout victory, I mean, the polling going into the final week of that campaign was neck and neck. And there were national polls that had Romney ahead in the popular vote. So I think sometimes, as we're living through these elections, it can really, it feels like a huge nail biter and we don't really know what's going to happen. And then, everything kind of makes sense 2 weeks later where, we might be kind of pulling our hair out and then Kamala Harris ends up winning easily. I still think that's on the table, but I do think there's a sense in which the fact that it's even this close, kind of speaks to, obviously a pretty profound sickness in our society.
I certainly agree with that, but I don't think a Trump blowout is a possibility. I do think a close election is most likely, possibly a bigger Harris win, but I think Trump has a ceiling, a real ceiling that he can't breakthrough.
No, I agree with you on the ceiling. What I'm saying is that in an electoral vote standpoint, I think there's a scenario where Kamala Harris wins the popular vote, which I think that she will. I think, most polling, although there are some polls now, the latest New York Times poll came up today, had it tied. But most polls have had Kamala Harris ahead. But, there are none of these swing states that she is guaranteed to win at all. She could lose Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, race on the line and win the blue states, win the popular vote, and Trump could have over 300 electoral votes. So that's the sense in which I mean, I don't mean that Trump's going to win 55%. Yeah.
I actually think Trump will do better in the popular vote and not as well in the electoral vote because of the way we have focused. He's focused on his base in blue states where we haven't spent any time campaigning. They'll turn out. So maybe he'll do better in the popular vote than he did. But the conversation we're having about this election and how you feel about it brings up another gap. The first gap we talked about was between reality, which you watch every day, and the way it gets covered in the media. There's another one, I think, about what we've seen on the ground and the way the two sides are talking about the upcoming election. So the polling looks tied. There's a lot of red wave junk polls that we know are added to junk the averages late in the game. But basically the polls are pretty close. The Democrats have the best ground game I've ever seen. The Republicans have outsourced theirs to talking points or whatever it is, not talking points, sorry, to turning points.
Turning point,
and to Elon Musk, and they don't really know what they're doing. So I'm a little bit optimistic. But if you listen to the Republicans, they are like, we're measuring the drapes, man. We got this. We've won. We don't even bother. We don't even need the election. We've won. And they're just, that's how, and it isn't just the Trump saying that. Like down the line, they've bought hook, line, and sinker that they can't lose, which has consequences for after the election when they do. But that they've bought that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, I've never seen so many fingers missing nails because they've been bitten down entirely by people who are in existential panic. How is there that gap too?
Well, I think part of it is that on the Trump side, part of the alchemy of authoritarianism is projecting strength at all times. And so, Trump has never been able to acknowledge that he's losing. Even in 2020, where the entire cycle polls had him down, 6, 7, 8 points, if not even more than that, nationally. He was projecting strength and confidence that entire time because that's just what authoritarians do. Once they start showing cracks in the armor, signaling weakness, some of the allure starts to wane a little bit. So I'm not really surprised by that. I also think that there's a real sense in which I think, for kind of rational people like yourself or myself, that the stakes are much higher on the left, where, we have good reason to think that if this election turns out poorly, that, it's going to alter our society in ways that will affect us throughout our entire lifetimes and my kids' lifetimes too. That it might take generations to kind of come back from a Trump victory and what that'll mean for our institutions and for our democracy. Whereas I think on the right, if you gave a lot of those people, if you gave the Charlie Kirks and the Stephen Millers and the Tucker Carlson's truth theorem, I think they would acknowledge that in a lot of ways they probably have more to gain, kind of being gadflies than they do. Well, maybe not. Maybe being in Trump's orbit when he's president will be, more alluring than being a gadfly. But I sometimes wonder with someone like Elon Musk, kind of relatedly, if there is a sense in which, he kind of views Trump as being, sort of a vehicle for him, rising to a high level of power where, we see that Trump is kind of addled. We see that, he's less coherent than he has been and is declining, and I think it's very fair to question whether he's going to be able to make it through 4 more years in the White House. And so, is there a sense in which if Elon Musk can kind of ride the coattails into some sort of powerful position in the government, that he could leverage that into having, real power? If Trump has to delegate more and more of the decision-making authority, I think that could be part of it too. But anyway, I think with kind of the gap that you mentioned in terms of the worry on the left and the confidence on the right, I think part of that is just the dynamic of, democratic culture versus an authoritarian culture. And I think part of that is just the awareness of the stakes on either side, and that, we have way more to lose, I think, on the left than people on the right do. And I thought that was one of the more brilliant Bill Clinton lines during one of the speeches that he gave down in Georgia, where he said that, he's basically encouraging people to try and find, Trump supporter in their life to engage with, and try to explain to them that, or, keep in mind that if Kamala Harris wins, their life will be better. But if Donald Trump wins, their life will be worse, and there is, I think, a real sense of that, from a standpoint of what's going to be best for everyone, the outcome has to be Kamala Harris winning. And I think people on the left kind of understand that in a way that, at least the more savvy people on the right are aware that the downside for them, if Kamala Harris wins, isn't the same as vice versa.
So I am a Chicago Democrat. I am not, all my life, the Democrats on the coasts were more ideological than those of us in the middle. We were much more practical, get it done, pragmatic. But part of that is also, if you repeatedly try and mess things up, you pay a price. We play a very tough politics. And I kind of hope that if the Democrats win, they will not just say, oh, isn't this lovely, we're all going to come back together, and let the same folks eat their lunch again. I think they have to pay a price. And I think we have not done a good enough job of saying to Fox, you know what, your broadcast license, it's over like 2 weeks after we win. And just start making them pay the same price. Say the same thing that Mr. Trump is saying, but we have actual reason to talk about it in their case. And make them pay a price, and certainly make them fear that there is a price to pay for being an insurrectionist, for tearing down the institutions of democracy, for trying to divide us. These are dangerous things.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't go as far as taking away broadcast licenses, but I certainly think, when you look at the aftermath of January 6th, the fact that, even in Trump's case, the fact that the prosecution took so long that Trump was basically able to run out the clock and put himself in a position now where if he wins, he can just make the whole thing go away. He obviously hasn't even been put on trial or anything like that for any of the federal cases. So I do think there needs to be more urgency. And, I do think that, the legacy of Merrick Garland in that respect, I sense will not be a very positive one. Just in that, he really had this kind of commitment to upholding norms and process in a way that was kind of ill-fitted for the circumstances that he confronted. And, he doesn't have a whole lot to show for, any of the Trump prosecutions, which maybe was in a lot of ways his most important task from the standpoint of our institutions and just, kind of having a sustainable democratic society. So, I would certainly, if Kamala Harris wins, I hope that she will appoint an attorney general, have a DOJ that is a little more active than Merrick Garland has been and acts with a little more speed, and doesn't try to, make sure that every single norm is upheld to the cost of our democracy. And, I do hope that we get to a point, the next time that you and I talk, where if Kamala Harris wins, that we can have a conversation about the future of the Republican Party and what that's going to look like, because I think that's really fascinating. I think there's a possibility that Trump, the day after the election says it was stolen from him and declares that he's running again. And, I think that there's no real person waiting in the wings to challenge him again, right? That's kind of the really funny thing about all of this is that, funny isn't the right word, but kind of surreal, I guess, is probably a better term, that, Trump could very well lose. And I don't doubt that he will try, like he did last time, to say that it was rigged and that, he was, the results, the win was stolen from him. There was fraud in X, Y, and Z states. I'm sure he will try, like he did last time, to overturn the results. I think it's probably more difficult when you're not in power, like he was last time around. But then, from there, what happens? And, that I hope we get to a point, because that will be a sign that we're in a better place than we are now, where we can have that conversation. But I think that the possibility that Trump runs again is kind of underrated. I think, there's kind of this assumption like there was last time that if he loses, he'll go away. And I'm just not at all sure if that's the case.
Aaron, let me reassure you on that. When he loses, and when he decides he is not going to accept the results, the rest of us are going to have the courage to say what he really is, not an invincible strong man, but a pathetic, whining, selfish baby. And the clock starts again on all his trials. He will be sentenced. He will be a convict. He will not be allowed to run, and we will be done with him. And, even more importantly for America's psyche, we won't have to hear from him. There was a period of time, right after Joe Biden dropped out, where the country could not have been happier. Just mass happiness broke out all over the country. And some of it was because we didn't have any expectation in our politics that someone would do something as generous as Joe Biden did, who would put a country first that way. But it was also because, a week went by and we didn't hear anything from Donald Trump. we were free of him for a week. And it's that burden when it's gone, because he's everything he says is so negative and so painful.
Yeah.
They're stealing your country. They're raping your women. You're doing worse than you were ever doing. It's bloody and horrible, and just, it isn't reality. And gosh, to not have to listen to it for a while, we are going to be the happiest country on earth.
I hope you're right. I mean, I feel like we've listened to this entire cycle once already, though, right? Because people said the same thing after January 6th. They said, "Oh, it's great. He went down to Mar-a-Lago and he's pouting, how wonderful." And then 6 months later, I guess first of all, Kevin McCarthy went down there, did the infamous photo op, kind of kissed the ring, and that really started the whole process of rehabilitating Trump. He ended up not being convicted after a second impeachment. Now, he is older and more degraded than ever, and I think that's probably more of an obstacle than anything else. I think with what you mentioned in terms of he's going to be convicted, his trials are going to resume, I think all of that is true, but I also think that gives him an incentive to try to maintain his position, because then he can still play this is politicized card, weaponization, and that gives him kind of a reason, for trying to run again or declare that he's a candidate, something like that. Now, I could be kind of traumatized, I might not be thinking through this entirely clearly, but I feel like we already kind of lived this cycle, and and here's where we wound up, and so I don't know what it's going to take to break the spell, but I do think that the best possible outcome would be one where Kamala Harris has a convincing victory, and like it was in 2020, it doesn't come down to a situation where Trump can put pressure on one state. If it comes down to one state in the Electoral College, maybe it comes down to Pennsylvania. Trump can really try to leverage officials there to do his bidding. Like, the main obstacle in 2020 was the fact that he needed to overturn multiple states. If it came down to just Georgia in 2020, he might have been able to exert enough pressure, kind of, get the right officials lined up on side with him to overturn, that result, or at least come closer than he did. But the fact that it took multiple states, kind of gave all of the officials in those states a good reason not to go along with the scheme, because it wasn't going to work out anyway. It looks like in this cycle, given how tight the polling is, that it really could come down to just one state. And if it's a state that has kind of a feckless Republican legislature or feckless election officials, that's very concerning. So, I hope that you're right. I hope Trump has a convincing loss. And then, I believe he has the sentencing for the New York conviction. It's like November 16th or something like that. It's coming up pretty quick after the election. And think about how joyous of a day that will be if he loses. It'll be kind of like a capstone on this era in some ways. So I hope that that's how it turns out.
When I started this radio show, and I want to say it's 3 and some years ago now, I wrote a piece, and in it I said, look, we are lucky to be alive in this time that matters, because it isn't just all the things we're afraid of. It isn't all the cheating that's going on the Republican side, trying to radical gerrymander and suppress votes. We're not on the cusp of losing our democracy. We're on the cusp of creating something the world has never had. Not ever has there been a truly large, multiracial, multi-faith democracy where power is shared. I mean, America has always been biracial and triracial, Native Americans, black and white, but power wasn't shared. There wasn't any really one person, one vote, and women weren't allowed to vote. We may be the first. No, it's never happened in the world, and we may be the first to do it. This was never going to be easy in the history of humanity, and it was never going to come without a huge fight. But golly, it's worth fighting for, and I think a lot of people are not articulating it quite the same way, but they're feeling it. And that's that would be an amazing, and it would be good for the whole world if we showed we could do it.
Right. And I think back to 2008 because, the first election I could vote in presidential-wise was 2004. But then 2008, of course, Obama wins. I remember I was living near downtown Minneapolis at that time. And when the election happened and Obama was, it became clear Obama was going to win, people just taking to the streets and like the celebration and just the great vibes in the sense that, a page had really been kind of turned in a big way from, toward like a more humane foreign policy and having obviously an African-American as president, what a big deal that was. And, just that this page had been turned to a new era. And that, we kind of find ourselves all these years later in this position that we do. And a lot of it obviously is kind of a backlash to Obama. I mean, the whole Trump thing, of course, was directly in response to reaction to Obama, and that the reactionary forces have kind of had as much success as they've had. And, if you would have told myself that back in 2008, I would have been very surprised by that. But this does kind of feel in some ways like, the final battle, in the sense that if Trump loses, can you really come back from losing 2 consecutive presidential elections when you've been the nominee 3 times? I mean, he's done a lot of unprecedented things, but that seems like kind of a, that seems. But then the other question kind of related to what you were bringing up is, where does this fight go if he wins? And, I'm sure, that it'll be incumbent upon all of us. I've thought through this a little bit, just like anybody does do, to wake up the next day and still have a sense of, solidarity with people in your community, and, to try and keep your heart open. And there's going to be a lot of temptation to, spend a lot of time on the blame game and reclamations within our coalition as to, who messed things up, where things went wrong. And I guess it's pointless to go too far down that road until we need to, but, that'll be kind of a very challenging time, and I'm not really looking forward to that. But, I do think it'll be incumbent on people to have a sense, in their minds that, history doesn't come to an end, that life goes on, and, there'll be another fight to try and make things better. So, you can't give up even if things don't turn out the way that we all want them to. And again, I hope that we don't really have to think too far, through that, because, maybe we won't have to. But I think it's good just to kind of, be aware that that is a possibility, and, kind of think through what that means for you and your family and your community.
Oh, it's a terrifying thought for me. I mean, when he won against Hillary, I thought at the time, I wrote at the time that I didn't like the results, but I would hope that he would reach out to the country and try and bring us together and try and move the whole country forward together. And then he gave his inaugural speech where he said to half the country, "You're terrible, and there's blood on your streets," and he never turned back. He never once reached out to people, to half of the country. He didn't. He was like, what's my narrow majority that I can hold together, and the rest of the people can all go jump in Lake Michigan or wherever you live. So if it happens again, I don't know what my personal reaction will be. Deeply, I will be frightened for sure, but I'll be as determined to resist. I have no expectation he would reach out. I have no expectation that he would try and govern the whole country. I think it's resistance at that point, and we will figure it out. But that's a very different and very darker game that he's asking.
Yeah, well, you're right, because I remember election night 2016, and of course, it became clear pretty early in the evening that Hillary was going to lose. I mean, it wasn't like the kind of
Yep.
It was by about midnight or so, if not even sooner than that. It was because she had lost Pennsylvania and Michigan, and that was kind of the whole deal right there. But then, she called Trump to concede, which, of course, people forget that happened, and they claim that she never conceded, which is not true. But then, if you remember, because I remember staying up late for this, Trump did a speech at it must have been about 2 a.m. East Coast time. He finally did his speech at Trump Tower. And it was one of the, it still kind of singed into my mind how bizarre of a speech that was for him, because, first of all, he seemed surprised that he had won. And then second of all, it was kind of this weirdly, he was kind of dwelling on unity, and I pledge to be president for all Americans. And, he seemed kind of shell-shocked, but alternately, kind of making these vague allusions toward unity and reaching out and all this stuff. And then, for me, it was even before the inauguration. It was, if you remember, there was a whole controversy over whether he would divest from his businesses.
Right.
He held the infamous press conference with the folders of blank sheets of paper.
Yep.
And there was bringing in Michael Flynn as his national security advisor. We knew that was going to be bad news. So it became clear to me during the transition that it wasn't going to go well. But there was that one moment on election night where I remember kind of going to bed that night and obviously being very disturbed by the results, but kind of being like, is this really going to be? Is he going to be maybe a little bit different than maybe we thought he was going to be in office? And it didn't take very long to be kind of disabused of that. And I think at this point, that's part of the scary thing about Trump coming back, is that he's not going to hire Rex Tillerson. He's not going to hire John Kelly to run DHS. It's going to be loyalists and kind of radicals right down the line. And so that's where, when you talk about how you're going to be in resistance mode, I think that that's a very fair way to approach it, and probably a smart way to approach it, because there's going to be temptation to do kind of shock and awe stuff right away, like he tried to do, to a kind of a clumsy way with the Muslim ban the first time around. But I think he's not going to have, someone like John Kelly actually running DHS who, had some affinity for the Constitution and wasn't going to just blindly follow orders. I think he's going to make sure that the people around him will follow those orders, regardless of whether they're legal or not.
Aaron, he's not going to hire people like that. He's not going to reach out to anybody. But the other thing he's not going to win. So I want to just tell you that put that prediction down. I appreciate we have to prepare. It's possible he's going to win, but today it's not likely. We have a great ground game, tied polls, but a great ground game, and the polls have undercounted Democrats now 3 times in a row. I am.
I should just mention, I know we're wrapping up here, but I just want to say that the reason I kind of dwell more on probably the negative than most is that I'm staring at the negative all day long. I mean, like I said, we're going to wrap up this call, and I'm watching Trump's speech, and I'm watching Trump in Texas, which will be a hate fest towards migrants. And it's like, I think I have I'm more in tune with the downsides than I think a lot of people are who maybe aren't totally immersed in this. So that's where my anxiety comes from.
Absolutely right. And let me end where I began, which is to say that a lot of people have made a lot of sacrifices in these years to try and make sure that we have that better future rather than that darker one. And you are one of the people who's made those sacrifices. And it's hard on the soul to do what you've done, which is to watch every speech that man has made. And I honor your work, and I'm so grateful to you that, I've been able to free ride on your work, and I haven't had to watch all of that horror show.
Well, thank you very much. It's very kind of you to say, and I look forward to chatting next time under hopefully much more happy circumstances. But in any event, it's always nice to chat.
Thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate it.
Yep.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye. All right, everybody. That was the fabulous Aaron Rupar. Follow him. Watch his stuff. Really important.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Brian Beutler's newsletter, Off Message, is terrific. He is, fearless, and he's captured the politics of this, this very difficult, very important moment. After a couple decades as a reporter and a columnist and an editor, he's moved to Substack as part of the sort of transformation of journalism. And you should read Off Message. It's really fabulous. Brian, we're recording this before the Saturday when my show airs, because I'm going to be spending Saturday going door to door canvassing. And I love that you went. I love that you went door to door. So first, it raised 2 questions for me, though. First, talk about, I guess, what it means when a journalist goes door to door. I guess how disclosure matters in the politics of journalism has changed, and then tell me about the experience of going door to door.
Sure. Well, I mean, a journalist who works for someone else, for an outlet owned by someone else, and it reports to an editor is in almost every case going to be disallowed from canvassing. And most journalists in those jobs would not feel comfortable doing it themselves. And I think that there are good reasons for that, right? They're becoming time as partisan politics becomes something that actually threatens journalism per se. I do think that it's worth news outlets revisiting what they think their role within the partisan ecosystem is, given that they all understand that if the election goes a certain way, it could there could be a crackdown on what they do. But it's important, I think, that when people read coverage of a campaign, that they can assume that the reporters who wrote it, the editors who edited it, the publisher who published it, aren't major donors to candidates, don't volunteer for candidates, because then it raises natural questions about whether the coverage that appears in the paper is good, whether there are things that the reporters know that aren't being allowed into the newspaper or onto TV because they're trying to help one candidate or the other. So that's why it's unusual for a journalist to do canvassing or phone banking or any kind of volunteering for any campaign. Mm-hmm. I myself didn't do it even when I was at Crooked Media, which is a liberal media company founded by former Democratic Party officials, where volunteering for Democrats is actually encouraged. I was helping to stand up the written content there, the newsletters there, and I wanted a firewall just so that people who signed up could take it to the bank that this component of the company was not sort of in cahoots with the fundraising part of the company or the volunteering part of the company, and that wasn't the purpose of the news product. Now I'm on my own, and I'm just thinking ahead to my own future as a writer and as a reporter, and what conditions I would like to be doing that under. And they're not under a Trump administration. I've already covered Trump for one term. It was not a pleasant experience. And then, there are ideological reasons and moral reasons and humane reasons why I don't want him to be president again. But I also have a selfish interest in just having a more pleasant environment in which to do my work. And so since I work for myself now, I can do what I want. And so I went door knocking in Pennsylvania last weekend, understanding that with an understanding that I made with myself that if I did it, I would write about it and disclose to my readership that I did it despite what I think are valid concerns about it. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote that article. It ran this past Monday for listeners tuning in on the weekend, and the experience was good. It was my first time doing any kind of political volunteer work like this, because I'd been a journalist my whole career. And then before that, I was basically in college. And then before that, I was a child. So didn't have many opportunities to do it. And so apart from the disclosure and all the stuff I wrote about why I didn't, for professional reasons, want Trump to become president again, I wrote about what actually happens when you go door knocking. So the people who've never done it, it's just like to demystify it for them, so that whatever might make them nervous or anxious or apprehensive about doing it, maybe like I could help set aside those concerns. And it really is not a scary thing to do. It's also not what you would traditionally call fun. There's a lot of walking, and there's a lot of knocking on doors of empty houses. And if you catch bad weather, which fortunately I didn't, you're going to be out in the rain or out in the cold. But it's a very quick education in the complexities of American politics, and in the changing of the electorate in what is like a very strange election in a lot of ways. And so, the campaign that you volunteer for is going to try to direct you towards people who they believe intend to vote for you, but might not be dependable voters. They might forget, they're not super habituated to voting, or people who they think can be persuaded to vote for their candidate. And they'll try to steer you away from people that they know to be fully on the other side of the partisan divide. That data isn't perfect. You'll probably encounter one or two committed Trump supporters if you go door knocking for Kamala Harris, but they're not, evil people. They'll just say, nope, made up my mind, I'm voting Trump. Have a nice day, right? And so then you can feel the impact you're having with the rest of the people that you talk to. And a lot of it is, you find out, I already put my ballot in the mail. That's great. Thank you for voting. Conversation's over. Some of it's like, oh yeah, my ballot's on the counter. I just have to fill it out, and you get them to commit to doing it that day or whatever. And they, you like increase the likelihood that ballot will get returned. You help people who are confused by the rules, so that they can manage to get their ballot cast without any kind of apprehensions hanging over their heads. And you can encourage other people from the community you're volunteering in to take up a volunteership themselves. And if you can successfully do that, you might create this sort of snowball effect of sort of padding Harris's margins, because the people who volunteer within their own communities are just going to be more effective at talking to their neighbors than if you take a bus from out of town to go knock on doors. So it's very rewarding, even though it is, you're volunteering your labor to play this sort of game of inches, where your impact, it's a little diffuse. I didn't leave there confident that I knew exactly how many votes I managed to net for Harris, but I think it was probably more than zero. And if you multiply that across a whole field operation, you're talking real numbers. So it's a good thing for people who are worried about the election to do. Much more productive than sitting at home on a Saturday or Sunday, scrolling through whatever social media you use, getting more and more nervous or distraught about things.
Did you go as part of a group, Brian?
I went with my wife, but we were on a bus that I forget if it was the Harris campaign proper. We picked it up at, like, I think the Democratic Women's Club in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And it was chartered by Democrats.
Yeah.
And the bus was full. And actually two buses left from that location that morning to go to two different parts of Pennsylvania. So it ended up being probably somewhere between 100 and 200 people who spent all of last Sunday door knocking, actually, like, pretty deep into Trumpy Pennsylvania, which tells you a little something about where Harris is trying to pick off votes and build a margin. I left feeling, you don't want to overinterpret things like yard signs and whatever, but for an area that is very Trumpy, the Harris campaign is out organizing the Trump campaign where I was, and that's good to see. Was
there camaraderie on the bus? Were you sharing stories on the way back?
So yeah, people definitely were. I was writing on the way back, and so I kind of plugged in my AirPods and did the noise canceling thing so that I could focus. But yes, I mean the everyone who got on the bus and then took the bus home did it with a positive mental attitude. It's the sort of thing that, it's not my natural state to be in a room or a bus or whatever full of people who like hardcore partisans. Yeah. And there's a kind of rah energy that is like prevails in those spaces that's a little alien to me, but it is contagious, and it's also just like there's no less threatening an environment than a bus full of people who are volunteering for the same campaign that you're volunteering for. And so there was definitely more story exchanges, people talking about how many shifts they've put in. Like the more hopeful or the more eccentric encounters they had with different voters, all that kind of stuff. So you will, unless you're disinclined to, unless you're introverted or busy or whatever, you will meet people who see the world similarly to you and who are excited and trying to channel their nervous energy into something productive. And that's a good place to be, I think. Especially considering that so many of the alternatives are just like alone with your thoughts. Letting your mind wander to the worst possible place and then just marinating in that for a whole weekend. I mean, given a choice between those two things, you definitely want to pick up a volunteer shift.
Yeah, I really appreciate your sharing that story. I come from a different place. I'm a lifelong partisan, I guess. My experience is going door to door in Chicago in February, so the weather is not an issue. But God, I love being out and meeting people and hearing their stories and what you think a Trump voter is, and then when you see one at the door, you just get a sense that we're all in it together, and that we're going to be able to be okay. It's just, you get optimistic doing this and doing it with other people.
Yeah, there are, especially in like southern Pennsylvania where I was, there are definitely houses where they're so festooned with Trump regalia that you kind of, those aren't going to be on anyone's list, any Democrat's list to door knock on. But you do get the impression that if you just showed up at their house trying to convince them to vote for Democrat, they'd yell at you or, they'd laugh at you or they'd just be kind of, I guess, about it. You're not going to those places. The Trump voters you might happen upon in passing or as a result of some data error or whatever are going to be people who are themselves proximate to Democrats. Right? They share a house with a Democrat, or their daughter or their son is a Democrat, and those aren't going to be people who are going to antagonize a Democrat for trying to affect the political outcome that they want. And so the 2 or 3 Trump supporters that we talked to were actually super nice people. And, one was actually not a Trump supporter, really, just like really did not like Kamala Harris and was debating between not voting and voting Trump. This was somebody who had never voted and is in her 70s, right? But she, I think, was lived with somebody who voted for Democrats and just wanted to talk with a couple strangers about politics and issues. You could tell that she watched a lot of conservative media and so was, kind of thinks about politics as something that people just talk about all the time because that's what happens on the roundtables and the programs that she's watching. Yep. And so it was a perfectly pleasant exchange, even though you're talking to somebody who just sees the world in a completely different way. And, another Trump supporter that we happened upon was the father of presumably a Harris voting daughter. And he just told us, I said, is there any chance that a couple of strangers might change your mind about that? After he told us that he intended to vote for Trump, he was like, no, I'm pretty set in my decision, but I appreciate what you're trying to do and have a nice day. It's fine. These are still human beings. And, if you think of Trump at the center of a series of concentric circles where the innermost circle is people who rioted at the Capitol on January 6th, and then the next circle is like the Hillary Clinton called the deplorables, right? Those are relatively small compared to the outermost circle, which is just people who voted Republican their whole lives or people who aren't hyper politically sophisticated and like Donald Trump for some aesthetic reason, he's brash or whatever, but they're not sociopathic. And so it's not that shouldn't be a reason that anybody who's kind of on the fence about whether they want to go door to door should do it. Like you are not like the rudest person that we encountered. We asked them if we could help them, if they intended to vote, if they had a plan to vote, if we could help in any way in that regard. And they're like, no, I'm not interested in having that conversation. And we said, thank you for your time, and walked away. And so what? A stranger was like a little unhappy that they got interrupted on their weekend. It's okay.
You never know, Brian. People have their own lives. I mean, for all you know, you knock on a door and somebody's, cousin just died, and their despondence has nothing to do with you. This is what happens.
Absolutely.
Right?
And on the other side of that, we knocked on a door where the lady who we were asked to canvass, it was her birthday, and so she was celebrating her birthday with her family.
See,
we didn't get to her. We didn't reach her because she had some stuff going on, and you don't want to be put in a position, or you don't want to accidentally put somebody out so much that it makes it, like you're trying to get them to do something that you want them to do. And if you say, well, I don't care if it's your birthday, I need to have this conversation with you, that might reflect poorly on the campaign and the candidate. And you don't want to change somebody's mind in the wrong direction. So you move on.
It's get out the vote time. It's not persuasion time. It's really, it is if you can, but mostly you're persuading people who are likely to vote to go vote. And if everybody who is so persuaded does vote, we win. Anyway, I'm grateful that you did it. I think it's great that you had that experience. I tend to think more journalists should experience what politics is like on the retail side, because it's very different than what you think. It's not as scary as people think, and the pull is a real thing. The camaraderie that people feel, the optimism that comes from it, it's a real thing. And so I think it's important that you did it.
And here's the thing that I think people should know is that it works in a mechanical way. You as a canvasser doing one shift, you might not have a tremendously successful day. Just like, if you go fishing, you might not catch any fish. But that doesn't mean that fishing is a bunk sport or a bunk hobby. People catch fish all the time, right? Yeah. And so at scale, it absolutely 100% nets votes for the candidate who's running the canvassing organization. And you can feel that there are criticisms within the political science world and the data world of the efficacy of these field operations because they're pricey for the campaigns. They got to rent lots of buses and they got to set up a lot of campaign headquarters. And, in a era where everyone's online and people can make ads very quickly now. I think many people have this intuition that the money spent on the field operation might be better spent elsewhere. But when a campaign has $1 billion or whatever it is that the Harris campaign has, they can do both. And there's a diffuse quality to the way advertising works, just like Coca-Cola can't be certain if their sales are tied to any specific advertisement. Campaigns can't be certain whether their vote margins were attributable to any particular ad. But they know that some of their canvassers are going to get people to return ballots who otherwise wouldn't have. And
people like being asked for their vote. And nobody wants to be taken for granted, And when you send somebody to someone's house and you say, we really need your help, we'd like your vote, that matters.
Yes. And because the election, at least in the polls, is extremely close, this is the sort of election where a field organization could be the difference between winning and losing, right? I mean, obviously the polls could be wrong in one direction or another, but if it really is a 1% race in Pennsylvania or a 0.7% race in Pennsylvania, and Harris wins, they will be able to legitimately say that, but for our field organization, we would have lost this race. And then if you
grateful to
participate in that, you know that you contributed to the thing that was decisive in the end. Obviously, if a campaign is losing by 5 or 6 points, a field operation is not going to save them. And if a campaign is winning by 5 or 6 points, a field operation is icing on the cake. It's not going to be decisive like that. You're talking 1%, 2% of the overall margin or the overall vote share, but it's definitely real. Like campaigns can ask canvassers, and the canvassers can say, "I got that person to return their ballot."
Well, so here in the Midwest, people from Chicago are spending time doing what you did in Michigan and Wisconsin. And I am thrilled to hear that buses are going from New York and from D.C. to places in Pennsylvania. So people say, in this election, you have to live in a particular battleground state to participate and make a difference. But that's not true this time. People are helping from every place in the country.
Absolutely. I mean, the stakes of the election are extremely clear to Democratic Party activists and reliable voters. And I think that's one of the reasons for Democrats to be hopeful is that there's no illusion basically anywhere in the party. You have to go to the fringe. You have to go to the unreliable voters to find these sources of concern. There's no taking anything for granted. There's no underestimating how bad a Trump presidency could be. And so people are willing to travel. Now, obviously, the fact that I had to drive over 100 miles to be in a place where canvassing would have any effect at all is a big indictment of our political system, right? I mean, everyone should be able to canvass in their communities because everyone's vote should count the same no matter where they live. And the fact that that's not true it points to the fact that we don't have a true one person, one vote democracy in the United States, and that's something that
after this election,
change.
We can talk again about the changes, the structural changes that need to happen. Hey, when you and I last talked, which I think might have been May, we were both wondering how Republicans could be more trusted on the economy than Democrats, especially since the economy, after all, is doing kind of fabulously well. Mm-hmm. But now, in the last few weeks, it looks like Kamala Harris has erased most of Trump's lead on the economy. And I just think that, given sort of the historical thinking on that, is a pretty remarkable thing, don't you?
Yes, I think it points to a couple things. One is that Harris has done a very good campaign. No matter how you slice it, a big chunk of that is just attributable to her. I think it also said that some of the views about the economy that we were hearing before she took over the campaign weren't really unfiltered impressions of the economy. It wasn't people. Pollster calls them up, asks them how they perceive the economy. They look in their wallet, they check their bank statement, they look at their grocery bill, and they think, I felt better about the economy in the recent past, so I'm going to say it's not very good. I think that it was reflective of two distinct things. One is that the Republican voters and conservative Americans, more so than Democratic voters and liberal Americans, are primed to answer these subjective questions in a way that helps Republican politicians and hurts Democratic ones. And this is just a function of asymmetric polarization. There are definitely Democrats and liberals who play these sorts of games too, or they actually feel despondent when the president's a Republican. And so that's how they log their impression of the economy to voter. It's through this partisan lens. But the second thing is that there were a lot of people responding to those surveys who were not actually trying to communicate that they thought the economy was bad. They were trying to communicate political pessimism about Joe Biden's candidacy. Yep. And all it took was somebody younger, more vital, more vigorous to step into his shoes and run a confident campaign. And suddenly their outlook on everything became rosier, right? And it's not, I don't know that there's like a ton of scientific literature on this because in my experience, political scientists keep going to look for material explanations for these weird findings. But if you just think about your own life, right? If you're in a bad mood, if you're hungry, right? I mean, it can bleed into everything, right? Your whole day is, and everyone is kind of intuitively familiar with how that works, right? If life is giving you a bunch of lemons, you're probably going to be pessimistic about areas of your life that are actually fine, right? The same is true in politics. And so when people were saying, when it was like only 38% of people say that the economy is good, you're talking about 38% of people who are partisan Democrats, and they are excited to beat Donald Trump, and they're being somewhat objective about the true state of the economy, where everyone else is kind of speaking their feelings. And then there's another interesting thing that I read this week, a research paper by Ernie Tedici and some other economists, who found that one of the main indicators of economic sentiment is run by the University of Michigan. And earlier this year, I believe, they changed their methodology to include online responders. And they did a regression or however they did a calculation, and they found that new methodology downward biased the responses by something like 11%. So reporters would look at this index and they would see everyone's miserable, and they'd report that like consumer sentiment is in the toilet. But it was really just depressed by the new methodology, and that if that methodology had been applied on in Trump's first 3 years or in Biden's first year, it would have found that the economic sentiment was much lower than it appeared to be. So a lot of the reporting about this was just confused by the way survey takers take data and the fact that they change their methodology.
That's interesting. The political consequences too, right? I mean, like when Republicans lose the ability to say, we're better on the economy, they got not much left to campaign on, except for, gee, we don't really like the idea that America's diverse. I mean, it's driven them to the darkest corner of the universe because they just don't have any.
So I want to talk about how this works in a couple ways. One is that you can see it in the way the Trump campaign and its affiliated dark money or patent groups are blanketing the airwaves in the last couple weeks. There's nothing, like barely anything on the economy or inflation. It's all anti-trans advertising, trying to paint Kamala Harris as somebody who wants to give gender reassignment surgery to prisoners, and it's gross, but it's an indicator, right, that attacking her on the economy has not worked, is not working anymore. They don't view it as like a high return form of persuasion. So they're going to the gutter.
So here's what I don't understand. Like, the economy affects everybody in America, but there are like 12 trans prisoners in the entire country.
Yes.
I mean, just talk about an issue that matters to people. You know what? I mean, I get that you can outrage people, but it really in their lives, this is an issue this is a nothing.
Yeah, well, but that's the thing is that there's a subtext to everything like that, right?
Right.
When Democrats run ads about healthcare or whatever, there's super text. Our policy is better than the Republican policy, and then there's the subtext, which is those guys have cold hearts, right? Those guys don't care about you, and so I think if you want to be a little generous to the Republican operatives who are making those ads, they don't deserve absolution. They're making really gross, bigoted ads. Yeah. But their intent, I don't think, is purely to be monsters to trans people. It's to try to convince voters that Kamala Harris is some kind of radical or some kind of way out there on the loony left, like this is what she's thinking about. And so her answer when she's asked about this has been to say this is a really marginal issue. This is not something that affects almost anyone in this country. I think it's a smart one. It's a good way to remind people that, like, even if an ad kind of hits you in your lizard brain and it makes you feel like a little off about one candidate or the other, you ask yourself, like, does this really matter in my life? So I think that that's smart of her. But these, the fact that media about issues can be, or about the material state of the world even, can affect how people feel about candidates is also pretty intuitive, even to people who work in politics who are resistant to the idea that it's really kind of like what comes out of the television that matters more than what's happening on the ground, right? There will be a jobs report from the Department of Labor in a week from Friday, I believe. And it's going to say something. It'll probably say the economy once again created 180 or 190,000 jobs on net over the month of October. But let's say for some reason it came in low. The economy only created 10,000 jobs on net. Or in a nightmare scenario, the economy lost 50,000 jobs on net. Now, almost everybody who receives that news is going to receive it through the newspaper, through the television, or through social media. And almost all of them will have had no disruptions in their life. Their job is secure. Their livelihood is sound. They're doing pretty well right now. Nevertheless, the news is going to rattle them, right? And it's because it's going to be conveyed in this tone of alarm and disappointment. And once you kind of understand how the media around and the way public figures discuss issues of substance and materiality can affect the way voters think just as much as their raw circumstances, it should really dramatically change how you think about how politics ought to be conducted. And it helps make sense of why Republicans are so invested in. They have Fox News, they have Sinclair, Elon Musk bought Twitter. They're trying to bully all the social media companies into not policing disinformation. And why are they doing that? Is because they understand that when you can flood those channels with demoralizing, angering, cruel, divisive stuff, that it redounds to Republican benefit.
Brian, I got to interrupt you because we've run out of time, I'm afraid. And I hate to end it on that down note that propaganda actually works. But I just want to remind everybody that we started on the up note that if you go door to door, you know what? It has an effect too, and a salubrious one. Hey, I'm grateful for your time, and I want everybody to go to Off Message and look at Brian's newsletter. It's terrific. And Brian, we will talk again post-election and compare notes.
All right.
Then we can talk about how to fix it.
Edwin.
Take care.
It's a deal. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Mark Maxwell is back. You know him. He's the political director at KSDK in St. Louis, and he has been, one of our most valuable guides through this crazy election cycle. Mark, I just want to start with this. This is going to be our last conversation before this election, and I'm grateful to you for the insight and the expertise you have shared with us, these last couple of years.
Oh, well, I'm just glad to be here, and thanks for having me. It's been a lot of interesting twists and turns, and now we're ready for the only poll that matters.
Yep. Well, and everybody should know we're taping this early because I'm going to, during the time I'm normally on the air Saturday, I'm going to be going door to door in Wisconsin. As I've told everybody, I am not a journalist. I'm a partisan, and everybody's got to do their share. So I'll be out working the polls. Let's just, from your perspective, looking back on this campaign, like what were the most astonishing things that you saw?
Well, I think that it wasn't planned to be part of the campaign, but the assassination attempt on former President Trump's life was a moment when I think the entire country dropped its jaw. And probably a lot of people still haven't quite processed just how close to disaster that was. Imagine, the RNC had already happened beyond just the tragedy of what that would have meant. But then the whole party would have been, rudderless without it. I mean, that was just a wild moment. And to see the RNC was just about to happen. This was setting the stage for him to come and, officially claim the nomination. That was eye-opening. Then there was the Joe Biden dropping out of the race. That was clearly a, massive upset in the whole dynamic. And, now we've seen reporting in the aftermath about the role Nancy Pelosi played behind closed doors, nudging the president in that direction. Kamala Harris's quick ascent and, almost coronation at the DNC and the big celebration. And then afterwards, I think her biggest moment so far has been the debate, which, was widely seen as a victory for her. Those three moments, I think, stand as the biggest moments. I guess if you wanted to throw a kicker in there, you could say just the optics of Donald Trump serving fries at McDonald's would be, something that I think is just one of those political cartoon moments that's going to stick in people's memories for a while.
Yeah, I think I agree with you about biggest moments. I guess I would add the DNC convention itself, which was, seen by a lot of people and I think a little bit game-changing in the introduction, letting people know more about Kamala Harris and the breadth of the coalition supporting her.
Well, the thing, it's always easy it's hard to compare what we know versus what we don't, and what we saw versus what we didn't get to see. What I mean by that is the DNC's decision to rally the troops around Kamala Harris, the VP, and you can argue if that was the right decision or not, but without having an open floor fight, without having that tension, without having that open question hovering over the room, you didn't have the dynamics. You didn't have the right pressure in the room to make that diamond. You didn't have the pressure in the room that would have somebody come forward and have that big, Obama moment that rallies people together. I do wonder if, because you're seeing recent polls down the stretch where the vice president appears to be slipping and a lot of persuadable voters who are on the fence or leaning one way or the other are breaking away from her in the last few weeks in the polling that we've seen. And I just wonder why that is. And some of those voters are telling reporters, they never felt like she persuaded them or won them over. And I just think if you're looking at potential flaws in campaign strategy, that's going to be one of those questions where if she doesn't win in November, I think voters are going to look back and wonder, well, could they have put her in a situation where she would have had to persuade more people?
That's interesting.
We'll see.
Okay, so that's the question. What will people point their fingers at if she doesn't win? What do people point their fingers at if Donald Trump doesn't win? Whose fault is that?
White women. So we often look in politics and we look at these trends, and I think it's important to learn from polling, of course, but we look at where are Black women falling in the elections? Oh, and there's a 5-point shift this way among Black women, or what about Hispanic men? And which direction is that voter block going? And we can kind of measure it, and there are these little shifts. I think that when we do that, we often miss the forest for the trees, and we don't realize that the largest voter block in America is white women. Roughly 40% of every voter in the country is a white woman. All those other categories I was describing of voters are much, much smaller percentages just in total numbers. So when you see a recent national poll from Reuters News that shows that white women have swung 9 points in favor of Kamala Harris, higher than what they were for Joe Biden in 2020, that's a massive shift. We don't see shifts like that. And you're comparing a Democratic win to what in 2020 to what is right now an unknown. So all of those polls that show early voting Republicans showing up in Georgia, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in higher numbers than what I think Democrats were expecting, that's the hidden variable beneath that R on the surface, which everybody can see and measure. How many of those are white women? And how many of those white women are shifting in favor of Kamala Harris higher than they had been for Joe Biden? That's the missing link here, that if Donald Trump loses on November 5th, or whenever we find out the final tally, November 6th, November 7th, I think the white women are going to be the ones that decide this race.
Okay, so the way you answered those questions is so illuminating to me, and I'm not picking on you, I promise. But if Kamala Harris loses, the fault is the Democrats because of the way they selected the nominee. If Donald Trump loses, the fault is white women breaking a different way. And I've sensed this in media coverage the whole campaign. If something is going amiss, blame Democrats. For Democrats. If something is going amiss on the other side, don't blame Donald Trump. It's somebody else's fault. Just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And no, you don't mean it. I hear that framing all the time.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, there's certainly more to it than that, right? I mean, for one, I would say this. If Kamala Harris loses, I think a lion's share of the blame will rest with her. And here's what I mean by that. If you look at any number of her interviews or appearances outside of the debate, which was, I think, her most stellar, performance just in showing the side-by-side contrast, a lot of let's back up for a minute. What do people like in Donald Trump? And if you're having this conversation, you have to acknowledge there are a lot of Americans who like what they see and hear in Donald Trump, even if they find some of his comments or his style off-putting. I think the thing they like in him is the reality TV part of it. It's that it's entirely unscripted. You truly don't know what's going to come out of his mouth next. And sometimes people hear that as they're processing it, their subconscious is telling them, oh, this is authentic. It's real because it's just off the cuff. Who would say that? And that's the part of him that, take everything around the substance of what he says, set that aside for a second, which I don't recommend you do as you evaluate candidates. Yeah. But if you're able to do that and just look at the way he comes across like a reality TV star. She's the complete opposite of that. Yep. She's sticking to her points. Maybe it's the prosecutor in her that wants to make sure she doesn't flub anything. But people hear that and they think, well, wait a minute. I just heard that same response scripted in a completely different setting after a completely different question. Why is it so scripted? And people start to wonder that. The other thing I would say is this, and I'm borrowing a point that I saw someone else point out. Kamala Harris's strategy has been the classic pivot to the middle. We see that from candidates all the time. They run in a primary, they run to the left, or they run to the right, and then they pivot to the big middle, right? We've seen that 1,000 times. But in doing so, and maybe it was smart, right? We'll find out. She went for the Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney Republicans to prove she can reach across the aisle. She muted some of her more progressive policy positions and her ideas from her run in 2020 and 2019, and she embraced the big middle, right? But what do a lot of Americans think of when they think of Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney? They think of the establishment. They think of that old, Bush era, Iraq War era that they broke up with when they elected Barack Obama, that they broke up with again when they elected Donald Trump. I don't know that, we'll see if that ended up being the smart decision and if that appealed to a lot of those Nikki Haley voters, a lot of those white women Republican voters. Maybe it works, but it's a risky bet. And if Kamala Harris loses, I think that there was a decision there not to stake out and energize what has been known as the traditional Democratic base, and instead court this different wing of voters that, frankly, a lot of Democrats hadn't tried to court in several races now.
Yeah. All right, so let's flip the question and the credit if she wins.
Well, look, how did it happen? I have a lot of follow-up questions, right? Like which states went where, which voter blocks went where. If she wins, look, the winners get to write the history books. There will be credit to go around for days. I think if she wins and Donald Trump loses, first of all, we have to ask the obvious question, are Republicans going to accept it? Is Donald Trump going to accept it? Do we have an entirely different set of facts before us where, playing out in real time, does a losing Donald Trump try to claim victory? How does that?
Yes.
What does that look like?
We know the answer to that. He's told us that, Mark.
But if he's out of power,
it's different.
And not in the White House, there's all these different dynamics.
Yep.
Even the Harris campaign is preparing for that possibility, right? So
yes.
I think that if she wins, I don't know that you're going to see like the traditional credit being passed around in those early days, because you might be seeing a lot of defense and going through challenges and explaining why new questions that arise. Look, I don't want to sound any alarm bells, right? But we saw in one swing state recently, one battleground state recently, where 5 mail ballots were destroyed because somebody lit the mailbox on fire.
Yep.
there are going to be moments that give people a little bit of pause, a little bit of panic. Wait a minute, is everything secure here? Are we sure that this is happening in a way that we can all verify? So there's going to be a lot of those queasy moments for people as we look at the vote come in.
Yeah. Right. So I think if she wins, if she loses, she's going to bear some of the blame for sure. If she wins, I think she gets a lot of the credit for sure. I also think Donald Trump will get the blame if any Democrat wins. But here we are now at the last minute, and, the recent polls say it's tied. Do you think, Mark, we would be in exactly the same place if Joe Biden was running?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
And I mean, his numbers were sort of starting to tank before the DNC. Mm-hmm. Then he got caught COVID, and he made the decision he was making. And I just, again, it's so hard to go back in time and try to predict an alternative course. Where would we be? I guess we'll never know. But the arrow was pointing down. Yep. And it was pointing down so sharply that he knew that. I don't know how he would have turned that arrow around so quickly. And I guess as voters started to really look at their options, but I don't know. I will say he's a different candidate. Joe Biden does have a little bit of that ability to go unscripted, and he's more comfortable in that setting where he's got that fight where he'll just randomly at an event call out some voter and say, "I'll challenge you to a push-up contest." I mean, those little random moments. I'm not saying that politicians should necessarily behave in this manner, but he had that spunk, that spark that said he would challenge somebody and that fight in him. So I don't know. I mean, you can't say never, but I don't think that he would be in his.
I agree.
Look at the donations, right? Kamala Harris outraised Joe Biden's entire 2024 presidential campaign that he had been running for a year and a half. She outraised him in 15 days.
Yep.
So I don't think you could mimic that.
So a lot of the campaigning that's going on, we don't see. I mean, there's been record spending on digital ads that are very targeted to very specific demographics. And there's been a huge campaign, Trump's campaign, on podcasts that many people like me have never heard of. So I think it'll be a while before we understand what the secret campaign was.
Yeah, it's hard to get into the mind of, I mean, that's why these elections are so interesting, because we start to see, how off was the pundit class? How off were the pollsters? Yep. And usually the pollsters do get a good sense of the national count, but, look, swing states, battleground states, they're battlegrounds for a reason. And we could see different shifts or variations happen. I keep wondering about North Carolina. Is that a possible pickup for Democrats? I don't know.
I think it is, Mark. I think it is.
It's going to be closer there, I think, than it was in 2016 and 2020. 2020 was pretty close, really, but we'll see. It's just so hard to say.
I agree. Predicting is a tough business.
Yeah, I don't recommend you do it. Yeah. This whole cottage industry of betting on politics and political outcomes, good luck to you. Anybody who's doing that. I don't know.
What do you make of the different get out the vote efforts by both sides? I mean, the Democrats are doing a very traditional door-to-door. I'm part of it. Go get the votes, get them out. And the Republicans, first they bet on Charlie Kirk, then they bet on Elon Musk. They're not doing traditional get out the vote for sure. They're doing branding kind of get out the vote. What do you think of the strategies?
Well, it's untested. Could it work? Maybe, but it sort of speaks to the heart of one of the many differences between these two modern parties. One party tends to prefer experience and people who've done this before, many races in a row, many years in a row, and the other likes disruptors, people who are willing to try something new and kind of break the mold. Certainly, Elon Musk offering people $1 million to sign a petition that is meaningless, but but that also, I presume, helps him build a mailing list where he can then nudge you to go vote. That's probably something I've never seen before. Has it been tried? Maybe. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Now the feds and the state of Pennsylvania
giving the million. He
questioning if it's legal.
He stopped giving $1 million after the feds sent him that letter. He certainly didn't do it yesterday. So,
but even to try that,
I love that. I love that. Just between us, that is the most Chicago thing I've ever seen. It appeals to me because we have this tradition of walking around money. Like the precinct captains with a stack of cash on election day, supposedly to buy coffee for election workers. Yeah, right. Some people retired on they're walking around money. But Harold Washington, when he ran for mayor in 1983-4, went to the community on the west side where it was just everybody was handing out cash. And he said to people, because the cash mattered to people, he didn't want to be on the wrong side of that. He said, take their money and vote for me. And suddenly all that cash made people were paying to vote for Harold. And I was sort of hoping Kamala would go to Pennsylvania and say, everybody should sign that petition. Are you kidding me? Take his money.
Yeah. Take the money. Yeah. Maybe Elon Musk was getting his campaign strategy from Willie Wilson. I don't know.
Yeah. Right. I loved that. I loved it. It made me feel like, nothing changes, just the scale gets a little bigger.
Well, that's a pretty good way to put it when you think about Elon Musk and what he's meant. I mean, look, one of the factors, I guess we're getting the cart before the horse here. We don't know the outcome. There's still a lot of race left. But at the other side of this election result, people are going to look back and question how big was Elon Musk's decision to buy Twitter, make it into X, you can't say that the content coming out and pummeling the senses of the American conscience on X are the same as they once were. Then you can explain that away in 1,000 different directions. But to what extent did that have an impact on the way people perceive things? To what extent did viral clips spreading rapidly like wildfire on X change the way people perceive things subtly? Did that move the needle? I think people are going to be studying that for years to come after this election.
Yep. Well, some of those viral clips, are not good for Donald Trump, and they have spread. The whole country now has a sense that very serious people think he's a fascist and think he wants something other than what our normal democracy is. Now, granted, a bunch of the country says, he doesn't really mean it. But a whole bigger bunch of the country, I think, says he does mean it, and we should worry. What do you make of this sort of end of, last minute revelations from the generals who used to work for him?
Well, there are a number of media critics, some of them former members of the media, who often like to say political journalists and journalists in general should cover the stakes, not the odds of a race. Cover what's at stake. Don't try to tell me which way the wind is blowing. And I think that's great advice. One of the ways to do that is just to sit back in awe at the historic and unprecedented nature of what we're seeing. When in American history, and tell me if I'm wrong, but when in American history have we ever seen nearly an entire cabinet publicly turn on their president and say, don't put that guy in the White House? If that's ever happened, maybe Andrew Johnson, back then media didn't happen the way it does now. I don't know who else in presidential history ever had that much open public dissent. Now, if you wanted to put lipstick on that pig, you could say, well, Lincoln had his team of rivals, and these were people that he previously disagreed with. Yeah, but that's happening in reverse, right? Like Lincoln would always say, have I not destroyed my enemies by making them my friends? And you've got Trump here taking former friends that are now open hostile enemies to him. It's in reverse. So, I'm not saying that lightly. I think that that's a thing that is a true fact that is objective, and that reporters should feel comfortable just helping voters ruminate with that. Now, I happen to know a lot of voters who, frankly, don't care, and I don't quite understand that. They think, well, that's just politics, or that's just, some people will even say the deep state or whatever, but they'll say, well, those are just people that are no longer in favor with Trump. So of course, once they're no longer in Trump's favor, they're going to talk trash. that's the reality TV mindset, right? Like it's the Celebrity Apprentice mindset. Well, they lost the game. They're out of Trump's court. So they're just bitter. And they kind of write it off.
I'd use a different phrase because it's a more political one. It is either a fascist or a monarchical point of view. You are either in or out of favor with the one leader. And that's, that way of thinking about government, about the presidency in a democracy is anathema to me. But I think a lot of people have just taken our democracy for granted so much they don't understand that it requires work.
Yeah, and I think there were some thoughtful voters in swing states, too, that do take Trump's words where he threatens, where he says he's going to potentially use the military or to deal with what he calls the enemy within. And, they listen to that and they think, well, do I need to take that seriously? And some of these folks say, well, I don't know. Our country's been around for a while. We have all these great checks and balances I remember hearing about in high school and civics class and all this, and maybe we'll be fine. And I think that there are those voters that try to rationalize and think, well, I don't know, I heard him say that, but would he actually do it? I don't know. The New York Times put out an op-ed, and they had a 2-word takeaway for that. Believe him. If he's telling you he's going to do it, believe him. That was the New York Times takeaway from it. So I don't know. I mean, some voters are going to try to vote for their wallet. Some are going to vote for their conscience. Some are going to vote for character. I know a lot of old journalists, political journalists, that would say, look, you can, I think it was, who was it? Maybe Bob Schieffer, who said, look, you can vote for somebody who, if you don't like the cut of their jib, or if you don't like the way they smile or the way they talk, you can vote for somebody for any reason you like. Just vote. So,
right.
I don't know. Voters could be finicky, right? But, certainly if someone is saying, the Supreme Court tells me I can do whatever I want, and I can fire Jack Smith on day one within a couple of seconds, and I can get rid of all these criminal investigations into me. That seems important.
Me too. Hey, Mark, we're running low on time, and I just want to, this conversation has reminded me just how complicated America is. It's dynamic. It changes fast in every way, technologically, socially, politically, ethically. We have different ideas in different periods in our history, but we change more rapidly than I think any place ever has. And that change is disruptive. And that change itself is a dynamic we have trouble dealing with. And then I'm thinking about, the state you're living in, Missouri, is sort of a good example of that. Somebody said on a podcast I heard the other day, or maybe it wasn't a podcast, that it's so conservative if they had a ballot initiative requiring women to be covered up, it would pass. I don't think that's right, of course, but you're in a state where there's an abortion initiative on the ballot. It's likely to pass, and the state, may likely to reelect Josh Hawley, who opposes abortion dramatically. And the same people may cast those 2 different votes at the same time. Explain that to me.
That disconnect has existed in Missouri for a couple of cycles. We might have discussed in the past how Missouri voters wanted to expand Medicaid. They wanted to increase workers' rights. They wanted to increase the minimum wage. They may do that again this November. And in many of those races, those same races, they elected Republicans many of whom disagreed with some of those core tenets. And it's funny, when you break things down to a single issue, it's a lot simpler to understand. When you're electing a character, a person, a complicated individual who has many different views and who can present and connect with you on a personal level, it's totally different. So I really don't think we should compare necessarily, because, when humans can just take the personality out of it, the culture out of it, just vote up or down on a minimum wage or on abortion access, that's a lot easier. When you're dealing with a person who can connect with you and who can persuade you, that's what makes politics so interesting. So there is that disconnect. Look, whoever said that a ballot initiative in Missouri to force a woman to cover up would pass, it doesn't understand Missouri. There was like a proposal on the floor of the House that would require a certain dress code, and even Republicans sort of lampooned that. It didn't go over well, and that was in the legislature. The public wouldn't adopt something like that. And the polling seems to suggest that this Amendment 3 to reverse the strictest abortion ban in the nation appears poised to win. Now, Look, you always have to count the votes. But the polling is pretty strong there, and the money has been immense. I mean, the big money that came into Missouri in 2024 wasn't for the governor's race. The Senate race got a fair amount, but the biggest pile of money went to this abortion question. And could that lift some Democrats in some districts? Yeah, probably at the House and Senate level. In the statewide races, in the state legislative races, you are going to see some effect. Will it carry any statewide candidate across the finish line if it's a Democrat? That remains to be seen. I think that's an open question. But look, in the Kuntz-Hawley race, Lucas Kuntz is the former Marine lawyer who is running up against Josh Hawley. I mean, he's been trying to run this populist race where he's saying, look, I worked under the Trump Pentagon for a while, and he's been talking about border security and family values, and he's been trying to run to the right of his party. He's not embracing Kamala Harris. He won't even speak about endorsing her. He's just he's doing the John Tester thing from Montana, seeing if he can pull it off in Missouri. But then he goes out to the shooting range in Kansas City this week. I don't know if you saw this. And he was with Adam Kinzinger, the former Illinois congressman. Yeah. And Kinzinger, a former Republican, Kuntz, a Democrat, both members of the military. And they stopped by some union workers' shooting range, sort of a pop-up shooting range there. And they're using AR-15 style rifles with scopes on them, shooting at steel targets about 15 to 20 feet away.
Oh, geez.
Now, if you don't know, a rifle with a scope like that, if you're really trying to challenge yourself, you might set a target 100 yards away, see if you can hit it.
Yeah.
10 to 15 feet away?
Even I could do that. I could do it.
Or shrapnel or something backfired and ended up striking a reporter in the arm. And he had to be, not stitched up, but wrapped up there. It was a TV reporter from Kansas City who caught some blowback, a piece of fragment or shrapnel or something. So there's the video of a sort of humiliated Lucas Kuntz, trying to tie up this reporter's bloodied arm.
Oh, that is
and Josh Hawley's having a field day with this.
Yeah, I bet he is.
I mean, it's one of the. He says, "Look, Lucas Kuntz wanted a fake photo op so bad he almost killed a guy for it." I mean, they have a debate Halloween night, and Hawley's going to be able to sit there and say, "Now, think of all the different punchlines he could use, right? Like, I've never shot a reporter. Maybe I wanted to strangle one or two. I mean, he's just going to have so much fun with this."
Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't see that, Mark. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that is one of the things. I mean, we're going to end on this because we're out of time. But one of the things I love about American politics is how unpredictable and sometimes bizarre and sometimes funny and always important that it is.
And how funny is it, or how ironic is it, that of all the Republicans that have used grenade launchers, flamethrowers, submachine guns, and the first one to go awry is a Democrat that picks it up, and a Marine at that. I mean, you just can't write this stuff.
Can't write it. Well, Mark, again, thank you for all your help understanding this cycle, and we will talk probably while we're counting votes, in the coming weeks.
All right, Edwin, good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Sarah Posner is back. She is, of course, the author of Unholy and has, throughout this election cycle, been our guide, the fusion of the religious right and the Republican Party. And Sarah, I did not want this election cycle to come to a close without touching base with you one more time, just to get your insights, really, into what has happened in the last couple of years and how that movement is likely to motivate their base in the coming days. Better understand, the end of this epic battle, the soul of our nation. So let me start with this. Remind us the role the Christian nationalist organizations played in this election cycle.
Well, I actually think that there has been a little bit of a shift in which Christian nationalist organizations are playing roles here. And I think the shift happened over the summer around the time of Trump's assassination attempts in Beutler, Pennsylvania, and the Republican National Convention. And now it looks a bit like Trump is flailing around on his own outreach to the more conventional Christian nationalist organizations and leaders and leaning more on much more radical elements of the Christian nationalist movement organizations like Charlie Kirk or charismatic leaders who believe in, prophecies and revelations and modern day apostles and prophets and so forth. So it has been a little bit interesting in terms of who he's leaning on, but it's not at all clear that will either increase or diminish his support from white evangelicals.
Okay, let's back up because there was a lot there. So the groups, the people that have pushed, the abortion bans in the country, or the religious freedom movement at the Supreme Court, which isn't really a religious freedom movement; it's a religious imposition movement. These guys have been building a power base for years. And you've written about their organizations and people like Tony Perkins and Linda McMahon. Remind us who they are, what they've been fighting for, and then we'll get to Trump.
Okay, well, I wouldn't put Linda McMahon in that category, but for the last 50 years, the Christian right has been building political organizations, legal organizations, parachurch organizations to mobilize white evangelicals and white conservative Catholics around banning abortion, stripping away LGBTQ rights, elevating what they call their religious freedom, which is really just a license to discriminate against other people, and eviscerating the separation of church and state. Now, the pinnacle of their accomplishments, obviously, was overturning Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision 2 years ago. But they've nonetheless been hard at work in developing plans for a second Trump administration, and most of those are encapsulated in Project 2025, which I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with. And so their goals remain the same as they have been. During his first term, they saw Trump as their necessary vehicle for accomplishing these goals. He was compliant in and complicit in their nomination of extremist justices to the Supreme Court and lower court judges to the federal trial and appeals courts. He appointed their ideological favorites to political appointments within his administration. And he invited Christian right leaders to, they basically he had an open door policy with them in the Oval Office, and they were very regularly in his presence, praying with him, laying hands on him, but also talking about their policy objectives. And so they have spent the Biden years trying to claw their way back into power by supporting Trump, who they know their base believes is a God-anointed savior of Christian America. And so they're all still here, but there have been a few things that have happened over the past couple of months where it seems like Trump is elevating certain personalities above other personalities. And it's an interesting development in terms of the direction that Trump is going in with the personalities in the base, although it doesn't really change a lot of the equation in terms of, what their ultimate goals are.
So let's talk about that. You wrote a piece this week about Trump's Believers and Ballots Faith Town Hall in Georgia. So talk about that. It's fascinating.
So his campaign has a Believers in Ballots initiative. It's basically his campaign's faith outreach, which most campaigns on both sides, Democratic and Republican, have some kind of faith outreach team or initiative within the campaign. And typically the Republican side of that, reaches out to conservative evangelical megachurches and conservative evangelical leaders. There hasn't been a lot of action from the Ballots and Believers initiative this cycle, but Trump has made numerous appearances at Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA gatherings. Kirk has been hosting a lot of pro-Trump rallies and events, and has been doing get out the vote outreach for the campaign. But a lot of longtime veteran Republican strategists think that Kirk doesn't know what he's doing, and they're kind of concerned, kind of the way they're concerned about Elon Musk not knowing what he's doing with regard to voter outreach. So Trump had this event at a mega church in Zebulon, Georgia. It was billed as a Ballots and Believers town hall, but it was just kind of a train wreck. He was very out of it and rambling, as he is a lot these days. The participants in the audience barely got to ask any questions. They had been there for several hours awaiting Trump's arrival. He was about an hour late and rambled for the first 5 minutes before any questions were even asked, and then did not really respond to the questions that were asked. So, for example, one of the participants asked him about a study that was done by an evangelical pollster named George Barna. Now, Barna typically puts out some kind of survey before elections, raising alarm bells that evangelicals aren't going to go to the polls. So this young man asked Trump about this, and clearly was looking for the kind of answer where Trump would say, yes, evangelicals are the greatest voters. I appreciate and value them so much. They went to the polls for me in 2016 and 2020, and they're the heart and soul of my base, which they are. But Trump didn't say that. Trump basically knocked them for not going out to the polls enough, and then rambled on about COVID restrictions and guns and various other things, and barely made any sense. And then he left Zebulon, Georgia, and went to Duluth, Georgia, and participated in a Charlie Kirk event, where that was the event where Tucker Carlson talked about Daddy coming home and spanking his daughters.
That was weird and disgusting.
It was weird and disgusting, but that's kind of where Trump is gravitating with his faith outreach. He's not doing the typical, evangelicals, you're the greatest God-loving people, and, you're the heart and soul of my base. He's going to events where Charlie Kirk talks about spiritual warfare, and Tucker Carlson talks about spanking. So I think that there's been a rift that started around the time of the Republican convention. And if you remember, the Beutler assassination attempt happened just a few days before the convention started. And after the assassination attempt, both Charlie Kirk and Jack Posobiec, who is another far-right online troll who invokes religion a lot, unlike Kirk, who's evangelical, Posobiec is Catholic. But, they land in the same place. And they promoted this meme that because Trump, the bullets were fired at 6:11 p.m. and Ephesians 6:11 talks about the armor of God. People who have the armor of God are protected. That Trump must have been wearing. He survived because he must have been wearing the armor of God. And this meme just spread like wildfire in right-wing land. It was a repeated talking point at the Republican convention. And at the same time, at the Republican convention, Trump sidelined a lot of veteran evangelical political operatives from the platform drafting room. And they were really, really angry about that. And I'm not sure that on a personal level, that relationship has recovered because they were angry because in their view, Trump watered down the abortion section of the abortion plank in the platform, and they were angry that he wasn't explicitly calling for a national abortion ban. So, in their view, he wasn't being hardcore enough on the abortion issue, and they were angry that they were sidelined from the drafting process. So when you look at that and you look at him, leaning a lot more on somebody like Charlie Kirk, who's inexperienced in the sorts of things like drafting platforms and mobilizing voters to the polls, it seems like he's trying to build a new kind of religious right base, which is a lot more online, trolly, very very extremist conspiratorial rhetoric. Not that those things were absent from the old guard, but it's much of a different approach, and it remains to be seen whether the base is already there and they like the Charlie Kirk approach, or whether there will be some erosion because of this perceived snub over abortion.
That seems like very inside Christian nationalist baseball, but it also seems like political malpractice on the part of Donald Trump at this point in his campaign. I mean, it would be crazy to piss off that group right now. Why would he do that?
Well, I think that is a question that a lot of Republicans are asking themselves with regard to his campaign's use of both of Elon Musk's PAC and of Charlie Kirk's political organization to do their voter mobilization. There have been numerous articles written where Republican veterans of presidential campaigns are scratching their heads about why he's doing this. Now, remember, Trump is famously averse to anybody questioning him. He's famously willing to engage in all sorts of, backroom deal, grift, bribery to get people in his camp. And so, Charlie Kirk's organization is being paid a lot of money by the Trump campaign to do this voter outreach. And, Trump is acting like, he knows what he's doing. And, it's hard to tell at this point whether this has to do with Trump's ego or his evident cognitive decline or just straight up grift and graft, or some combination of all of that. But I feel like there is something happening where he's trying to shift the balance of power here. If he loses, I think there's going to be a lot of recriminations over that. But if he wins, then people like Charlie Kirk and Elon Musk are going to have a lot of power in his administration.
Yeah. But look, this is the first presidential election we've had where white Christian nationalist behavior is sort of well known and talked about, and not just in the movement, but the rest of us have now learned about it.
Right.
So if they lose, what happens? I mean, they can't work in secret anymore like they did early in the Biden era. What happens? They're done getting judges. They're done. I mean, the movement will get, there'll be pushback. The rest of us read, the First Amendment, which they scream about as meaning it protects their free speech, begins with like, wait a minute, you can't have an established religion is sort of the first thing it says. So I don't know.
Well, so I think a lot depends on, so let's take the hypothetical that Trump loses, yep, which I think they would not accept. They did not accept that he lost in 2020. So they would continue to make the preposterous claim that
he'll be in jail.
Pretend that Kamala Harris is not the legitimate president of the United States. I think a lot also depends on whether Democrats hold the Senate, whether they retake the House, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you've got, if the Republicans still control the House, they're going to have more like ridiculous show trials, at the behest of Trump's, yes, conspiratorial base. And if Democrats can't hold the Senate, it's going to be harder for, President Harris to get nominees and appointees confirmed. So there are a lot of moving parts here about what kind of role the Christian nationalists would play in the opposition. But they will definitely play a key role in the opposition because they are a central part of the Republican base. I mean,
and they're not
white Christian nationalists make up, and they're not going away. They make up 30-40% of Trump's electorate, and they are the engine that keeps the Republican Party going. So when they're in the opposition, they plan for the next Republican presidency, and they engage in conspiratorial backlash against a Democratic president. We saw that throughout the entirety of Barack Obama's presidency. And they're going to have you're double, quadruple that because like Obama, Kamala Harris is black, but she's also a woman.
Yeah. Hey, what do you make of, and I don't know if this comes from that movement or just from Trump himself, but what do you make of the anti-Semitism coming out of the campaign?
Well, Trump is an anti-Semite, and I think as time goes on and he's having this evident cognitive decline and unable to, there's no filter, not that he had much of a filter before, but the filter's gone. So Trump is an anti-Semite, and he is basically making the argument that Jews who don't support him ought to have their heads examined. They're not real Americans. He's going to blame them if he loses. He's said all of these things. And that's very much tied into his evangelical base's support for the right-wing regime in Israel, and which is tied up in their ideas about the end times and the second coming of Jesus. And so they also believe, they believe that liberal Christians and liberal Jews are bad, right? They don't see them as fellow travelers. They would see right-wing Jews much more as fellow travelers than liberal Christians. So when Trump says those things, I don't think about liberal or democratic Jews, I don't think it rankles the base at all. I don't think they see it as anti-Semitism. In their mind, supporting Palestinian rights is anti-Semitism.
Interesting. Wow. That can have consequences beyond the election.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Well, while we were talking, I reached for a book in front of me, and I just want you to know that if Ephesians 6:11 is useful for them, they should consult Genesis 6:11, which actually interestingly says, because I have it right here, the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So there you have it. You have a corrupt guy in a corrupt crowd, and it was filled with violence. So you can look at that good book in lots of ways. And my point is, these guys don't own the interpretation of the Bible, like they don't own the interpretation of the Constitution. And this narrowness that says my way is the only way of seeing the world, it plays into this other question that has nothing to do with religion, but is the fascist question. They seem similar. I guess it's not crazy that the Ayatollahs govern like fascists.
Well, I wouldn't compare it to that. I would compare it to Hitler and Mussolini and Franco, right? They all had support from the church. And so, yes, of course, fascists manipulate religious leaders or use religious leaders to claim that their political agenda is somehow, godly or in line with the Bible or the teachings of the Catholic Church or, however they're going to frame it. And that's exactly what Trump and people like Charlie Kirk and Jack Posobiec are claiming. I mean, Jack Posobiec wrote a book called Unhumans, which says that people who are, his fellow Americans who are liberals are not actual human beings. Now, I'm pretty sure that is not what the Bible says. Yet.
Or the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution.
Right. And so they're being very explicit about their fascism. Trump is being very explicit about his fascism. Trump's former, chief of staff, General Milley. Today, the Washington Post reported on a letter from 13 other former members of his administration who say, yes, this man is a fascist. Yes, this man wouldn't hesitate to try to deploy the military against his perceived domestic political adversaries. We're not joking around here. This is very real. And again, not unheard of for a fascist to weaponize support from supposedly religious figures in order to advance his quest for power.
Okay, so there is in America now, that's something that I had hoped would happen. There are evangelicals, certainly Catholics, many people of Jews, many people of deep faith who think that the right-wing agenda is not what the Bible says. The right-wing agenda is something antithetical to not their politics, their faith. Is that point of view growing?
I don't know that it's growing. I mean, the Democratic base, remains a mix of people who are religious and people who are not religious. But I do think that base coexists because the not religious people in the Democratic base recognize that there are religious people in the Democratic base whose, faith is very different from the purported faith of MAGA land, right? And the way that Harris and Tim Walz have talked about religion on the campaign trail basically embraces that. It embraces the idea that their own faith compels them to help their community, to help their neighbors, to not lie, to tell the truth and to treat your fellow human beings with respect and dignity, and to advance the cause of personal autonomy and freedom, right? They want to use it as, to say, this is who I am and this is who many other Americans are, but we're not going to bludgeon you with it, right? We're not going to weaponize it. And so Kamala Harris has gone to churches over the past several weeks as part of the Souls to the Polls, reaching out in Black churches and making sure that people go vote. And these are the themes that she has struck. And Tim Walz, who is kind of more in the camp of, look, I go to church and stuff, but we're Lutherans and we don't really talk about our religion that much. But he also has hit those same themes, maybe in a different way, right? He has invoked Matthew 25 to say, the MAGA immigration agenda is not biblical because we're called to help our neighbors and help other people in need, right? Mm-hmm. But I think maybe even more powerfully when he, talks about his, the values that he grew up with, which were also the values that Kamala Harris grew up with, that, he says a big part of that is help your neighbors and also mind your own damn business. So I think they're striking a lot of different chords without hitting people over the head with it. The personal autonomy and freedom, that you can simultaneously help your community, but also mind your own damn business, right? And so I think that they're sounding themes that they're sort of universalizing their faith in a way that plays across religious traditions and also plays across their very diverse base, which includes a lot of people who aren't religious.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense to me. Are there also religious leaders who just say, look, we've made a mistake by embracing politics, and we need to render under Caesar and mind our own business because our work is in another world? And is there a reaction against the politicizing of religion within some of the churches?
I think in some of them, it's an aversion to partisan politics. But I think that most of them see their role as not sitting out these political issues like immigration or abortion or, any of the other issues that are at the top of the agenda here, right? So A lot of them don't want to be seen as being locked in with a particular political party, but they do want to be seen as taking a stand on these issues that matter.
And are they all taking the same stand? Or are they taking different stands?
No, I mean, I think that white evangelicals are of all the religious demographics in the United States, white evangelicals are the most supportive of Trump's anti-immigrant agenda. Okay. But I think that there are a lot of liberal Christians who disagree with that, right? And want to help immigrants, right? So, but I don't see Like there are evangelicals who have spoken out against Trump, but they're the same evangelicals who have spoken out against Trump since Trump came on the scene, right? And so it's not like there's a new movement afoot. And, the polling data is like, he still has 80, 81%, 82% support from white evangelicals. Like that has not moved. So
are they as
I wouldn't expect
to
movement.
vote this cycle?
That is the question this cycle. That is the question. I've been telling people that I'm not making predictions, but yep. I kind of think that at the end of the day, they will, even if they've been disenchanted by Trump, not going full bore on the abortion national ban. I do think that at the end of the day, they'll come home to the Republican Party because that's just who they are.
Interesting. Okay, so the challenge on the Democratic side then is for everyone to show up because everybody's going to show up on the other side.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Sarah, that's a lot of fun. Again, I'm not in the prediction business, but one prediction I think we both said is that should Kamala Harris prevail, a good chunk of America is going to once again pretend it didn't happen and cause whatever chaos they can.
Yeah, I think that is. Yeah, I think that that's one prediction that we can probably safely, unfortunately, make.
All right, everybody, you heard it. Go out and make sure that that's the future we face as opposed to a future where they actually win and things get even worse. Sarah, as always, your counsel has been great. I've really appreciated all the time you've given me and everybody who listens to this show throughout this incredibly important and incredibly strange election cycle.
Thank you so much for having me, Edwin.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
Well, it's not Edwin Eisendrath taking your calls. It's actually Paul Shamari taking your calls. Edwin is doing the good work out there of knocking on doors in the swing state of Wisconsin, trying to convince voters to vote for their Democratic congressperson, for Senator Tammy Baldwin, and, of course, for current Vice President and hopefully future President Kamala Harris. But I'm going to be taking your calls on all of the subjects that you've heard on the show today. We're just a few days away from the election. I think we'll have, one more weekend before the official Tuesday where everybody will hopefully get their votes cast. I'm one of those people that goes voting on the day of. I did mail-in balloting, I think, in 2018 when Pritzker ran against Rauner. And though I liked the comfort of doing it from my living room, doing it on my own space, not having to wait in line, there's just something about going on that Tuesday and waiting in line and seeing everybody in the voting booths and just going to your polling place and getting it done. And I think I like that tradition, so I think I'm going to continue that tradition. But we'll see. But I always think this is the time of year that you should at least educate yourself with who's on the ballot. And I did find on Ballotpedia, if you go to Ballotpedia, they have a sample ballot. You just type in your address. They'll show you all of the different races that you would be voting for, including the Illinois measures that they're having to the Illinois amendment. So, there's more than just your congressperson or your local senator, and the president. There's all sorts of different things that we're voting for based on where you live on in November. But let's go ahead and go to the calls. I see the lines are filling up. I want to talk to Jim from Chicago. Jim, before we dig into what you wanted to talk about, tell me that you saw last night's Game 1 of the World Series, one of the most exciting finishes to a baseball game ever.
I'm sorry, but I gave up when it was 2-2, and I gave up for the last 10th inning. I didn't spot the 10th inning, which was to my chagrin because it was pretty exciting. Where the Yankees came up with one run, it was 3-2, and then the Dodgers. How many outs were the Dodgers had the bases loaded? How many outs?
It was 2 outs. 2 outs. They Shohei.
Oh my goodness!
Shohei was the second out. He swung at the first pitch when they brought in Nestor Cortes, who hasn't pitched in a month and is rarely ever used in relief. And then they intentionally walked Betts for the bases loaded. And then on the first pitch, Freddie Freeman crushed that thing into deep right field. It was honestly one of the most amazing moments. Go back and watch it if you get a chance.
Yeah, but anyway, that's the Yankee fans must be devastated.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. But please, Jim, what did you want to talk about?
I was going to say, if I gave an assignment to find the origins of QAnon, where would you start, Paul? Where do you think? What year would you start? Just give me an idea of what.
I'm probably one of the worst people to ask about this because I was never big on like the 4chan, 8chan, like some of these like little like dark internet spaces where people felt the need to share these like disgusting memes and just there no rules in some of these places, right? I think that's originally where this started, so I guess I would go there. I mean, I honestly I would be the worst investigator for this, but I mean, of course, trying to find out what would the FBI think about it? What do they know about it? I mean, I'd like to think that. After this many years, there's got to be at least some sort of feed on who it would be.
Yeah, give me a year though. What year would you think it would be? Like Trump's second year in office, or what?
No, it was before that. I'm pretty sure QAnon existed before that. So
that's right. That's right. Hillary.
Yep. Yeah, the Pizzagate and all that stuff. Yep. So I would say 2015, but I think you're right, though. I think it's originated in 2017, is according to the Wikipedia article that I quickly pulled up here. So,
all right, but Paul, it's just such a weird thing, and it'd be interesting to explore it more. Anyway, thank you, Paul. You got good callers. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim, and please go back and watch game 1 highlights and watch game 2 tonight because it's good baseball, even if you're not a Dodger or Yankee fan. Let's go to Brian in Joliet. He said Harris should have done something with Bernie or AOC, and I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Brian. Could you explain, please?
Yes, and I saw the game, and although I'm not really a fan of either team, that was exciting.
Yeah. I mean, if you like baseball, that was one of the greatest baseball games ever.
Yeah, that was something. Yes, so what I mean by that is only that I voted for Vice President Harris already, and I just believe that it might be beneficial to have a get-together speech with Senator Sanders or an AOC to get some of the undecideds on the more progressive wing of the party. And this was done 4 years ago when I saw a joint appearance on C-SPAN with Vice President, with Lieutenant Kamala, Senator Kamala, and Bernie Sanders. And I just think it might, fire up some of the undecideds. If there would be a speech, they should, like on C-SPAN, have them give a speech for Kamala and with her there. Is my rationale, and it was done before, and actually it was Joe Biden, the progressive wing of the party, regardless of race or sex, that helped push for Joe Biden over the finish line 4 years ago.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point, Brian, because especially 4 years later, it seems like a lot of the progressives, for whatever reason, have kind of stepped away from, the support of Biden or even the pick of Harris. And I'm wondering how much of that has to do with the war in Gaza, amongst maybe some other things. And I know it's a different circumstance than 2020. I'm with you. I mean, as part of the far left and the progressive sort of movement, I would love to see, Bernie in lockstep, or supporting Kamala or right there on stage. I'm wondering if that would alienate people in the middle that maybe are a little scared of the far left politics. And I'm wondering if, I'm just being an armchair political strategist now. I'm wondering if that was something purposely done in the campaign because they know that there's probably more independent voters in the middle of the road that they need to enhance versus entice the people on the far left. But it's an interesting thing. And I was actually kind of looking to see if Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez to rally early Wisconsin voters Saw this from Fox 11 News up in Madison, talking about that they're going to be heading to Wisconsin this upcoming week, but I don't think they're going to be appearing with any of the presidential or vice presidential candidates. So that's going to be interesting. That at least they're stumping for her. But yeah, it'd be nice to see Bernie on stage with Kamala Harris, because I think that would at least unite the Progressive Caucus.
Well, I was a Bernie backer. And supporter, and Liz Cheney does not excite me, but I still voted for Vice President Harris. It didn't alienate me from her, because I know that her views she's expressing them now are not Liz Cheney's views, and but they have a really wide tent. I just think it would make sense to let Senator Sanders or AOC along with Kamala to shore up, but to get a spark of energy from the more left wing, or the Bernie Senator Sanders wing of the party.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I hope in hindsight, usually whatever happens when a Democrat such as Kamala Harris, that might be a little bit more towards the middle, whenever they lose an election, it's always the progressives that get blamed first whenever a Democrat loses. So I'm with you, Brian. I would love to see a more united Democratic Party at this time around, and hopefully that momentum could lead to victories on Super Tuesday. But Brian, thank you for the call. I'm going to move on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's go to Steve from the Gold Coast. And now I know Steve is the political strategist here, so maybe he can set me straight on a couple of those things. But what did you want to talk about today, Steve?
Yes, a couple of points. And one from the research that I remember reading, has been a while, though. So QAnon has its origin in the Pizzagate nonsense that was being circulated circa 2015-16. And, of course, that morphed into QAnon. So I'm not quite sure how much they still embrace that, if at all, or has it just become part of MAGA itself? I know that they embrace the idea of the deep state, and obviously everyone who speaks out against Donald Trump is part of some giant conspiracy, which, of course, goes back to the QAnon stuff. But I'm sure that they still weave the pedophilia nonsense and child human sacrifice, and all the other crazy nonsense that you see that came out of that. But, not to get too far afoot. But I have a colleague who's a psychologist, and she's done some research, and she makes a great point. We were having this discussion. She said, do you remember the character of Nathan Jessup in A Few Good Men? And I'm like, oh, yeah, but, one of the greatest performances, in movie history. People still remember Jack Nicholson on the stand and giving that speech. And, Tom Cruise is the hero, but that's the speech we all remember. And that's what Donald Trump represents, because he's a thoroughly despicable character. He's a misogynist. Everyone around him hates him. But in the movie, you're led to believe that we need this despicable character to protect us against the hordes that, are coming over that wall. And he's asserting that, you need me on that wall. You need somebody horrible. And that's the logic behind what she asserts is the logic behind why people, for instance, on the Christian right, support Donald Trump. He's got nothing to do with in terms of the value system that they embrace. God knows. I mean, if you look at Donald Trump's life, it's anything but Christian in terms of how he's lived it. Yet they embrace him because he apparently is their imperfect warrior, their defender. And I know it's a perverse, interpretation of religion, and certainly of Christianity, but that is where we are. And unfortunately, you and I can have these discussions, and we can talk about research, and we can talk about facts, we can talk about all of these things. They're immune from it because they're living in their own bubble. And now we're in a society where you and I live in one realm. That realm's defined by research and credentials and people who can demonstrate what they're talking about as a function of actual facts. And then over here you have people who just think we're part of a giant conspiracy to hide the truth, to destroy America, to destroy everything that they believe. That we believe in open borders and we want to turn half of the children in this country into a different gender. And that we're the party of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is anti-white and anti-European. I mean, this is what they believe. And, and so a warrior like Donald Trump is going to stop all of that. So, again, perverse understanding of what's going on, but that's the world in which we live.
And then, of course, the average Trump supporter not really understanding what the role of a president, what he does, because it's clear that Donald Trump wants to be, an authoritarian figure and have complete control. But that's just not how the executive branch operates. And the idea that the president can just kind of like point their magic wand and just kind of change everything instantly without the help of Congress or even some of the states. So, and not to mention the fact that why would Donald Trump of all people represent some sort of going against the machine and going against the norm when he's part of this elite, rich sort of cabal of people that he came from before politics. So I don't understand how the average low income voter would look at this guy as some sort of problem solver when he has really no diplomatic bone in his body, says some of the most hateful rhetoric ever, very divisive politics. It's just mind numbing to me how people can believe in him.
Absolutely. It's what's the matter with Kansas on steroids. And, how many more stories do we need coming out of his first administration where somebody, was in the Oval Office and had to say to him as if they were giving, a high school civics lesson, no, Mr. President, you're not empowered to do that. You're not an emperor. So, and, there were literally speed bumps where someone would say, okay, whatever he says, run it by us before you go anywhere with it because he doesn't know that you can't do these things as president. It's just amazing that he was elected the first time. And what's more amazing is that now we know Donald Trump, he's a known commodity, and that the race is this close. It's a frightening prospect for a developed democracy.
Not to mention, I can understand how he got in the first time, because I think it was just like a break from the norm. And especially with Hillary Clinton and the Clintons being in the White House and coming off of 2 terms of a Democratic president, I saw how the pendulum swung. Not that I agree with it, but I see how it happened. 2020 made sense to me. If Trump wins in 2024, I'll never be able to explain how, how could the guy send people to the Capitol to stop the electoral process and then we voted the guy back in? It's going to look terrible on American history when we look back on it if Donald Trump were to win. But Steve, I got to go. I'm running out of time. And as always, thank you for calling in. Guys, thank you for participating in the show today. Thank you for Edwin Eisendrath for giving me these last 30 minutes to talk to you guys. I want to thank Aaron Rupar, Brian Beutler, Mark Maxwell, Sarah Posner for appearing on the show today. I want to thank Edwin for doing the work and door knocking in Wisconsin. I believe he's going to be doing that again next week in Michigan. So I think maybe expect the same sort of thing where it might be some pre-recorded interviews. They're going to be very relevant, though, and you'll have me behind the microphone for the end of the show to listen to what you guys think and have that conversation. But thank you guys for joining us. Stay tuned. Collaboration Radio is next, followed by If Cage Walls Could Talk. This has been The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath. Thank you.
Listen to the Thom Hartmann radio program every weekday from 11 to 2 right here on WCPT 820, where facts matter.
NBC News Radio, I'm Lisa Carton. With just 10 days before Election Day, former President Trump and Vice President Harris are both campaigning in Michigan. Michelle